The tap of a blind man's cane echoes across the Alvarez farm, each measured step marking time like a ticking bomb. Locals whisper that Emilio Alvarez must be mad, refusing to sell his land to El Lobo's cartel. But madness isn't what makes the old farmer smile when he hears the cartel's vehicles approaching his isolated farm. It's not what makes him sit calmly in his rocking chair as armed men surround his property. What they don't know is that his cane holds more secrets than just a hidden blade, or that his blindness masks decades of tactical awareness. They don't realize that every tap of that cane is a signal, counting down to the moment his 3 sons, America's deadliest special forces operators, turn his humble farm into a killing ground. El Lobo's cartel thinks they're about to make an example of a helpless old man. Instead, they're about to learn why you never corner a family of wolves. Because on the Alvarez farm, the predators are about to become prey. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The sun hung low over the sprawling Alvarez farm, its golden rays casting long shadows across acres of well-tended crops. Despite its isolation among the rolling hills of cartel territory, the farm stood as a testament to generations of hard work and determination. Fields of corn swayed in the gentle breeze, their stalks reaching toward the heavens like countless green soldiers standing guard. The farmhouse, a sturdy 2-story structure weathered by decades of sun and storm, sat proudly atop a slight rise, overlooking the surrounding land like a watchful sentinel. Emilio Alvarez moved through his fields, with practiced ease, his weathered hands brushing against the corn stalks as he walked. Though his eyes had long since failed him, his other senses had sharpened to compensate, allowing him to navigate his land as skillfully as any sighted farmer. The familiar tap of his cane against the earth created a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, each step sure and purposeful despite his blindness. The morning air carried the sweet scent of ripening corn, mixed with the earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil. Emilio could smell the approaching rain, though the clouds were still distant on the horizon. His calloused fingers traced the leaves of his crops, feeling their texture and moisture content with an expertise born from years of farming without sight. Every plant, every row, every section of his land spoke to him in its own unique voice. The distant rumble of a truck on the main road caught his attention. His head tilted slightly, analyzing the sound. It wasn't the familiar rattle of Old Man Thompson's pickup or the steady purr of the local supply vehicles. This engine was newer, cleaner, out of place in their rural community. It passed without turning toward the farm, but Emilio marked its presence in his mind, another piece in an increasingly troubling puzzle. "Good morning, Mr. Alvarez." A young voice called out, full of warmth and respect. Rosa Martinez, barely 12, had become a regular visitor to the farm. Her footsteps were light and quick, bouncing across the packed earth with the energy only youth could provide. She helped with small tasks, but more importantly, she brought news from town and a brightness that Emilio treasured. "Rosa, your footsteps sound lighter today," Emilio smiled, turning toward her voice with unerring accuracy. "Did your mother finally let you wear those new shoes you've been asking for?" The girl's delighted laugh confirmed his guess, the sound carrying across the morning air like music. "How do you do that, Mr. Alvarez? It's like magic. They're pink with silver stars, and Mom said I could wear them today because I got an A on my history test." "No magic, Pequeña. Just years of practice and paying attention." He gestured toward the farmhouse. "Come, help an old man with his morning. Coffee. You can tell me all about this test while we walk." As they made their way toward the house, Emilio's acute hearing picked up the subtle changes in Rosa's normally bouncing step. There was hesitation there, a slight drag in her usually carefree movement. Something was weighing on her young mind. The test wasn't the only thing that happened yesterday, was it, child? Rosa's steps faltered completely then, her new shoes scuffing against the dirt. The silence stretched for a moment before she spoke, her voice smaller than before. "Mr. Thompson came by our store yesterday. He sold his farm to those men, the ones everyone whispers about. Mom says they didn't give him much choice." Emilio's grip tightened on his cane, but his voice remained calm, steady. a rock in troubled waters. Thompson's farm, you say? That makes 3 this month. His free hand reached out, finding Rosa's shoulder with gentle accuracy. Come, let's have that coffee. Some conversations are better had sitting down. Inside the kitchen, the familiar space welcomed them with the lingering scent of yesterday's bread and the soft tick of the old wall clock. Emilio moved with confidence through his domain, filling the coffee pot with water, measuring grounds, with practiced movements. Rosa watched him work, always amazed by how easily he navigated without sight. Your mother still puts sugar in her coffee, yes? Emilio asked, reaching for a specific canister without hesitation. Yes, sir. She says it's her one luxury. Rosa's voice carried a touch of pride. She works so hard at the store, especially now with everything. Emilio nodded, understanding the weight of what remained unsaid. As the coffee brewed, he settled into his chair at the worn wooden table, the morning light streaming through windows that had witnessed decades of similar conversations. Let me tell you a story, Rosa. One about my father. He leaned back, his unseeing eyes focused on distant memories. During the land disputes of his time, men with guns came to claim this farm. They thought they could intimidate a simple farmer. My father stood on this very porch and told them, "This land was bought with honest work and will only be taken with my last breath." Rosa leaned forward, her new shoes forgotten. What happened then? They left that day, Rosa, because they saw something in his eyes that scared them more than their guns scared him. Emilio's voice carried the weight of history, of legacy. Do you know what they saw? Rosa shook her head, then remembered to speak aloud. No, what? Truth, child. The truth that some things are worth dying for, and this land is one of them. He smiled, though there was steel beneath it. My father taught me that strength isn't in muscles or weapons. It's in knowing what you stand for and standing firm when the winds blow hard. The coffee maker sputtered its last drops, and Rosa jumped up to pour them each a cup. Emilio could hear the careful concentration in her movements, determined not to spill a drop. Tell me about your history test, he said, changing the subject. What period were you studying? As Rosa launched into an excited explanation of her project on local agriculture, Emilio's trained ears picked up sounds from beyond the farm's boundaries. 3 distinct positions, he noted. One in the grove of trees to the north, another near the old storage shed to the east, and a third by the fence line to the south. They were good, he had to admit. Their movements were careful, measured, professional, but to ears trained by decades of blindness, they might as well have been marching bands. Mr. Alvarez? Rosa's voice pulled him back to the present. Are you okay? Just fine, Pequeña. The coffee is excellent. He patted her hand. Now tell me more about your project. You were saying something about irrigation systems? Throughout the morning, as Rosa helped with simple tasks and chattered about school, Emilio maintained his usual routine while tracking the movements of their unwelcome observers. One had a radio, he noted, catching fragments of whispered reports. They were studying his patterns, noting his visitors, assessing his vulnerabilities. They saw what they expected to see, an old blind farmer helpless and alone. After walking Rosa to the main road, making sure she was safely on her way home, Emilio returned to his daily tasks. He tended to his crops with the same care he always had, checked the irrigation systems with practiced hands, and prepared his evening meal with quiet efficiency. To anyone watching, he appeared to be nothing more than a creature of habit, following the same patterns he had for years. As evening approached, Emilio sat in his rocking chair on the porch, the wooden boards beneath him creaking with familiar comfort as crickets began their nightly symphony. But beneath these usual sounds, his trained ears picked up others. The scuff of boots trying to be silent, whispered commands, the metallic click of a weapon being checked. A smile, barely visible in the gathering darkness, crossed his weathered face. They thought blindness made him vulnerable. They thought age made him weak. They thought isolation made him an easy target. But they didn't know about the modifications to his house, the security systems that required no vision to operate. They didn't know about the training he had maintained even after losing his sight, the skills he had honed in darkness. Emilio's hand ran along the smooth wood of his cane, feeling the subtle grooves that only he knew were there. Like his father before him, he understood that some fights choose you. His fingers found the hidden catch in the cane's handle, and his smile widened slightly. In the shadows beyond the farm's perimeter, one of the cartel's enforcers watched through binoculars. "Look at him," he sneered to his companion. "Just sitting there, smiling like he owns the world. El Lobo will wipe that smile off his face." His partner shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, man. Something about him. It's like he knows we're here." "Don't be stupid. He's blind as a bat. Besides, what's he going to do? Fight back?" The first man laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "Tomorrow, we'll show him who really runs things around here." The radio at their belt crackled softly. "Report. All quiet, Jefe. The old man follows the same routine every day. Gets up at dawn, works the fields, has coffee with that little girl from town, more field work, then sits on his porch every evening." "Any other visitors?" "None today. Looks like he's all alone out there." "Perfect. Keep watching. We move soon." As the night deepened, Emilio remained on his porch, rocking steadily. The wind carried the scent of distant rain and the whispered conversations of men who thought themselves hunters. But Emilio knew better. A lifetime of blindness had taught him to see the world differently, to understand that true strength often lay in patience, in waiting for the right moment. His thoughts turned to his sons, and his smile took on a different quality. The cartel watchers might have noticed the change if they'd been paying closer attention, might have wondered what put that look of quiet satisfaction on the blind farmer's face, but they were too busy congratulating themselves on finding such an easy target. The night wind carried whispers of the coming storm, but Emilio Alvarez sat untroubled, listening to the sounds of those who thought themselves predators, never realizing they were about to become prey. After all, a lifetime of blindness had taught him one crucial lesson. The most dangerous predators were often the ones you never saw coming. Inside the house, hidden from prying eyes, his modified cane rested against a wall. Beneath its innocent exterior lay proof that Emilio had never been as helpless as he appeared. Like his father before him, he would protect his land. Unlike his father, however, he had advantages that none of his watchers could guess at. "Soon," he whispered to himself, rocking steadily as the hidden observers continued their surveillance. "Soon, you'll learn what it means to threaten an Alvarez." The night deepened, stars appearing one by one in the vast Texas sky. Crickets chirped their endless symphony, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to its pack. Just another quiet evening on the Alvarez farm, where a blind man sat on his porch, waited patiently, and smiled at things only he could see. The morning stillness shattered as 3 black SUVs roared up the dirt road leading to the Alvarez farm, dust clouds billowing in their wake. Through the open windows of his kitchen, Emilio heard their approach, noting the aggressive rev of engines and the particular crunch of expensive tires on gravel. His hands remained steady as he finished his morning coffee, unhurried despite the impending confrontation. The vehicles pulled up in a practiced formation, blocking any easy escape from the farmhouse. Car doors opened and slammed shut with military precision as booted feet hit the ground. Emilio counted the footsteps, 12 men, spreading out across his front yard. One set of footsteps stood out from the rest, heavier, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority. This would be El Lobo. Emilio took his time rising from his chair, retrieving his cane from its place by the door. His fingers found the hidden catch in its handle, checking it was ready if needed. Then he stepped out onto his porch, presenting the image of a simple blind farmer greeting unexpected visitors. "Good morning," Emilio called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "I don't usually get so many guests this early." A deep laugh answered him, closer than expected. El Lobo moved like his namesake, silent and predatory. "Emilio Alvarez, I've heard much about you." His voice carried the cultured accent of expensive schools mixed with street-hardened authority. "They say you're a man who doesn't know when to take good advice." "I've found most advice comes with strings attached," Emilio replied, his unseeing eyes fixed somewhere past El Lobo's left shoulder. "And I've never been fond of puppetry." The cartel leader's amusement faded. He climbed the porch steps, his expensive leather shoes making distinct sounds against the wooden boards. The scent of designer cologne mixed with gun oil reached Emilio's nose. Let's speak plainly, viejo. You're sitting on valuable land, and you're not using it to its full potential. I'm offering you a generous deal, more money than you'd make. In 10 years of farming, Emilio's grip tightened imperceptibly on his cane. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. We've worked it, bled for it, made it prosper. It's not for sale. Sale? Who said anything about a sale? El Lobo's voice took on a mocking tone. Think of it as a mandatory retirement package. You're blind, old man. How much longer can you really work this land alone? One of the cartel thugs laughed, emboldened by his boss's attitude. He approached the porch, pulling out his pistol and waving it inches from Emilio's face. Maybe we should help him see things more clearly, Jefe. El Lobo held up a hand, silencing his man. That won't be necessary. Yet. He turned back to Emilio. I respect tradition, Senor Alvarez. That's why I came personally to make this offer. But tradition must sometimes bow to progress. The world is changing. You can either change with it or be swept aside. Emilio stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed despite the threat surrounding him. The world is always changing, Senor Lobo. But some things remain constant. Honor, pride, the right to keep what you've earned through honest work. Honest work? El Lobo laughed, but there was no humor in it. Look around you, old man. Oh, I forgot. You can't. Let me describe what I see. I see a broken-down farm barely surviving. I see a blind old fool living in the past. And most importantly, I see no one here to protect you when things get difficult. The cartel leader stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Accidents happen on lonely farms, Senor Alvarez. Equipment malfunctions. Fires start. Sometimes people just disappear. It would be a shame if anything happened to you. Or to that sweet little girl who visits you. Rosa, isn't it? For the first time, Emilio's calm exterior cracked slightly. His jaw tightened at the mention of Rosa's name. El Lobo noticed and pressed his advantage. Ah, now I have your attention. You see, I know everything that happens in my territory. Every visitor, every delivery, every whispered conversation. You might be blind, but I want you to see the truth of your situation very clearly. Emilio's response came in a voice as hard as steel. I see more clearly than you think, Senor Lobo. I see a man who mistakes cruelty for strength, who thinks fear and intimidation make him powerful. My father faced men like you before. They're all dust now, but this farm remains. El Lobo's amusement vanished entirely. He nodded to one of his men, who strode forward and smashed the wooden railing next to Emilio with the butt of his rifle. The crack of splintering wood echoed across the yard. That's just a taste, El Lobo said. Next time we won't be so gentle. You have 24 hours to reconsider my offer. After that, he let the threat hang in the air. Emilio remained motionless as El Lobo descended the porch steps. The cartel leader paused at the bottom, turning back. Oh, and Senor Alvarez? Don't bother calling the police. They know better than to interfere in private business matters. The sound of car doors slamming and engines starting filled the air. Gravel crunched under tires as the SUVs pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Only when the last engine sound had faded did Emilio allow his shoulders to relax slightly. He made his way carefully down the damaged porch steps, his cane finding the splinters of wood scattered across the ground. His free hand reached out to touch the broken railing, fingers tracing the jagged edges where solid wood had been reduced to fragments. Inside the house, Emilio moved with purpose to his bedroom. His hands found the old rotary phone on his bedside table, digits moving surely over the familiar numbers. The line rang 3 times before connecting. It's time, Emilio said simply, then hung up. Miles away in a dusty military outpost, Diego Alvarez looked at his satellite phone with a grim expression. His fellow soldiers noticed the change in his demeanor immediately. The usually composed Special Forces operator radiated controlled fury. Everything okay, sir? His second-in-command asked. Diego was already moving, gathering his gear with practiced efficiency. Family emergency, I need to take some leave. All of it, sir? All of it. Diego paused, his hand resting on his tactical vest. "And I'm going to need to call in some favors." Back at the farm, Emilio settled into his daily routine, but with subtle differences that only someone who knew him well would notice. His movements were more precise, his attention to his surroundings even sharper than usual. He checked the locks on all his doors and windows, not with fear but with tactical awareness. As evening approached, a truck pulled up to the farm. Emilio recognized the sound of Thompson's old pickup, but the footsteps that approached his porch weren't Thompson's. "Mr. Alvarez," a nervous voice called out. "It's Jimmy Thompson. My father. He wanted me to warn you. Those men who bought our farm, they're not just businessmen, they're dangerous." Emilio nodded slowly. "I know, son. They paid me a visit this morning." "Then you'll sell?" Jimmy's voice carried equal parts hope and shame. "There's nothing else you can do. They own everything around here now. The police, the banks, even the county commissioners. There's always something you can do, Jimmy. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price for standing up to men like that." "My father wasn't willing to pay that price," Jimmy said bitterly. "He sold our farm for pennies on the dollar, but at least we're alive." Emilio's voice softened. "Your father made the choice he thought best for his family. Every man must decide for himself what he's willing to fight for. They'll kill you, Mr. Alvarez. Everyone knows what happens to people who stand up to El Lobo." "Perhaps." Emilio smiled, the expression containing secrets Jimmy couldn't begin to guess at. "But death comes to all men eventually. The question is what we do with the time we have." After Jimmy left, Emilio sat on his porch, listening to the evening sounds of his farm. The crickets were starting their nightly chorus, but underneath their familiar song, he could hear the watchers in the darkness. El Lobo's men, no doubt, recording his every movement. His thoughts turned to his sons. Diego, the eldest, had followed his warriors hard into special forces, becoming the kind of soldier that other soldiers whispered about. Javier, the middle son, had turned his fierce protective instincts toward long-range precision, becoming one of the military's top snipers. And Mateo, the youngest, had channeled his creative mind into demolitions and tactical planning. They had left the farm years ago, each answering the call to serve, but they had never forgotten their roots. Every visit home, every phone call, every letter had carried the same message. They were ready if he ever needed them. Now, as the sun set on what might be his last peaceful day at the farm, Emilio allowed himself a moment of pride. El Lobo thought he was threatening a helpless old man. Instead, he had just stirred up a hornet's nest. The night deepened, and still Emilio sat, appearing to any observer as nothing more than a stubborn old farmer enjoying the evening air. But his mind was working, planning, preparing. His sons would come, and with them would come a reckoning that El Lobo and his cartel couldn't begin to imagine. A vehicle passed on the distant road, its engine sound familiar to Emilio's trained ear, one of the cartel's SUVs, making another patrol. They were watching, waiting for his response to their ultimatum. Tomorrow would bring violence one way or another. Either he would cave to their demands, or they would begin their campaign of intimidation in earnest. But tomorrow would also bring something else, something El Lobo hadn't counted on. The wolf thought he had cornered easy prey, never realizing he had just challenged a family of lions. Emilio's fingers found the hidden catch in his cane once again, feeling the reassuring mechanism beneath. His father had taught him that a man's strength lay not in his muscles or his weapons, but in his willingness to stand firm when the storm came. Tomorrow would prove whether the lessons of both father and sons had been learned well. The night wind carried the scent of rain and the promise of violence. Somewhere in the darkness, cartel soldiers watched and waited, confident in their power, secure in their control of the situation. But they didn't see what Emilio saw in his mind's eye. 3 highly trained warriors already moving through the night, answering their father's call, bringing with them the kind of justice that men like El Lobo never saw coming. "Soon," Emilio whispered to the darkness, and in his voice was the quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly what storm he had unleashed. "Soon you'll learn what it means to threaten an Alvarez." The crickets continued their song. The wind rustled. Through the corn, and on his porch, a blind farmer smiled at the night, waiting for the thunder to roll in. The desert night cast long shadows across the secluded airstrip as a military transport plane touched down, its engines winding down to a low hum. No lights marked the runway. None were needed. The three men who stepped out of the aircraft moved with the fluid grace of predators, their equipment and weapons creating only the slightest whisper of movement. Diego Alvarez led the way, his broad shoulders carrying a heavy pack with practiced ease. Behind him, Javier shouldered his custom rifle case, while Mateo brought up the rear with a duffel bag full of specialized equipment. None of them spoke as they made their way to the waiting truck, their movements synchronized through years of working together in the world's most dangerous places. 20 minutes to the farm, Diego said finally, sliding behind the wheel. His voice carried the weight of command, earned through countless missions. Javier, any movement on the satellite feed? Javier checked his phone, where a specialized app showed thermal imaging of the area around their father's farm. 2 observation posts, one near the North Grove, another by the old storage shed. They're not trying very hard to hide. They don't think they need to, Mateo added, his fingers drumming restlessly on his equipment bag. They're hunting a blind farmer, not 3 special forces operators. The truck moved silently through back roads, avoiding the main highways where cartel lookouts might be watching. Diego's hands were steady on the wheel, but his jaw was set in a hard line. Dad wouldn't have called unless things were serious. He's handled cartel pressure before. El Lobo's different, Javier said, still monitoring his phone. More ambitious, more ruthless. He's been systematically taking over every farm in the region. And now he's threatened our father. Diego's voice carried a dangerous edge. That's a mistake he won't live to regret. The truck turned onto a narrow dirt track that would bring them to the farm from the rear, away from the cartel's observation posts. They killed the engine half a mile out, continuing on foot through the darkness. Each brother moved with different but complementary skills. Diego like a ghost, Javier scanning the high ground for sniper positions, Mateo noting terrain features that could be used for his specialized work. As they approached the farmhouse, Emilio's voice carried softly from the darkness. You boys still need to work on your stealth. I heard you coming from 100 yards out. The brothers exchanged grins. Their father's hearing was legendary, enhanced by years of compensating for his blindness. Diego stepped forward first, embracing Emilio. Good to be home, Dad. Javier and Mateo followed with their own hugs, the family reunion brief but heartfelt. Emilio's hands touched each of their faces, reading the changes time had brought. You've lost weight, Javier. And Mateo, you've grown a beard. Special forces, lifestyle, Javier shrugged. And Mateo thinks the beard makes him look distinguished. It makes you look like a hipster demolitions expert, Diego said, but his teasing carried an undercurrent of tension. Dad, tell us everything. Inside the kitchen, over coffee that none of them really wanted but all of them needed, Emilio laid out the situation. His voice remained calm as he described El Lobo's visit, the threats, the 24-hour ultimatum. His sons listened in silence, their expressions growing darker with each detail. They threatened Rosa? Mateo's hand tightened around his coffee cup. The youngest brother had always had a soft spot for the local kids. Emilio nodded. El Lobo likes to find pressure points. The fact that he mentioned her means they've been watching the farm for weeks, learning routines, identifying vulnerabilities. Did he leave any men behind? Diego asked, already planning. 2 observation teams rotating every 6 hours. They think I don't notice the shift changes. Emilio's lips quirked in a slight smile. They're professional, but not military. Cartel soldiers, with more enthusiasm than training. Javier stood, moving to the window. The farm's too exposed. We should get you somewhere safe until this is handled. This is my home. Emilio's voice carried the same steel they remembered from childhood. I won't be driven from it by threats. Besides, running now would only put others in danger. El Lobo would make an example of me to frighten the other holdouts. Diego nodded, understanding. Then we defend it. Javier, I want you on overwatch. Find the best position with clear lines of sight to all approaches. Mateo, work your magic. I want surprises. waiting for any uninvited guests. I'll handle close-quarters defense of the house." The brothers moved into action, each falling into their specialized roles. Javier disappeared into the night with his rifle case, heading for the water tower that overlooked the entire property. The elevated position would give him command of every approach to the farm. Mateo began a systematic survey of the property, his trained eye identifying natural choke points where his expertise could be most effective. He pulled equipment from his duffel bag, motion sensors, remote triggers, and other tools of his trade that would turn the farm into a deadly maze for any attackers. Diego walked the perimeter with their father, listening as Emilio pointed out recent changes to the property. "The fence line's been moved 10 feet in on the north side," Emilio explained. "Creates a natural channel there, and I've let the brush grow thick by the old tractor shed." "You've been preparing for something like this," Diego realized. "I've been blind, son, not stupid. I knew someday someone would think I was an easy target." Emilio's hand found Diego's shoulder. "But I didn't fortify this place to save it. I did it to protect what matters most: family." In his sniper's nest atop the water tower, Javier set up his equipment with practiced precision. The custom rifle was an extension of his body, each piece fitting together with familiar comfort. Through his scope, he could see the cartel observers, in their hiding spots, unaware that they were now the ones being watched. "2 hostiles in the North Grove," he reported via radio. "Another team by the storage shed. Standard patrol pattern, getting sloppy. They're not expecting trouble." "Keep watching," Diego's voice crackled back. "I want to know the instant anything changes." Mateo's voice joined the conversation. "Motion sensors are placed on all major approaches. Working on some special surprises for the North Road. Anyone tries to drive up fast, they're in for a rough time." Diego moved through the house, checking lines of sight, planning defense positions. The old farmhouse was solidly built, its thick walls offering good cover. He noted with approval the reinforced shutters his father had installed, the sturdy locks on all doors and windows. "The cartel has resources," he warned his father. "Once they realize we're here, they'll come in force." "Let them come," Emilio said calmly. "This land has seen violence before. My father fought for it, and his father before him. Now it's our turn." The night deepened as the brothers continued their preparations. Javier remained vigilant in his sniper's nest, monitoring the cartel observers through his scope. Mateo worked silently, rigging approaches with his specialized equipment, turning the familiar landscape of their childhood into a combat zone. Diego intercepted cartel radio chatter with specialized equipment, listening to their casual conversations. They were bored, confident, expecting an easy operation when the ultimatum expired. They had no idea what was coming. "Movement on the main road." Javier's voice came over the radio. "SUV approaching. Matches cartel description." The vehicle slowed as it passed the farm, its occupants doing a routine check. Through his scope, Javier could see them laughing, probably joking about the blind farmer who would soon learn his lesson. The SUV continued on, disappearing around the bend. "They're getting cocky," Mateo observed. "That'll work in our favor." "Don't underestimate them," Diego warned. "El Lobo doesn't control this territory by being stupid. Once he realizes we're here, he'll adapt quickly." Inside the house, Emilio sat at his kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. His acute hearing picked up every sound: Mateo's quiet movements as he worked, the subtle shift of Javier's position on the water tower, Diego's measured footsteps as he patrolled. "Your mother would be proud," he said softly when Diego passed through the kitchen. "Not of the fighting to come, but of how you boys turned out, how you look after each other." Diego paused, remembering the strong woman who had helped shape them into the men they'd become. "She taught us that family is everything. That's why we're here." "She also taught you about consequences," Emilio added. "Starting this fight, there's no going back. El Lobo won't stop until he's destroyed us or we've destroyed him." "We know, Dad." Diego's voice was firm. "We've fought cartels before, in other places. They only understand one thing: decisive force." The radio crackled again. "New shift coming. In for the observation post, Javier reported. 3 men each position, better equipped than the last group. Night vision gear, better weapons. They're professionals, Diego noted. Probably ex-military. El Lobo buys a lot of trained soldiers. Not as trained as us. Mateo's voice carried a hint of pride. North approach is prepped. Anyone tries to rush the farm from that direction, they're in for a nasty surprise. Dawn was approaching, the sky beginning to lighten in the east. Soon El Lobo's ultimatum would expire, and the real test would begin. The brothers continued their preparations, each focusing on their specialized roles while maintaining constant communication. Javier's voice broke the pre-dawn quiet. Vehicle approaching from town, civilian truck, 1 occupant. Through his scope, he watched as the truck pulled up to the farm's main gate. A familiar figure stepped out. Rosa's father, looking nervous as he glanced around. "I'll handle this," Diego said, moving to intercept the visitor. Mr. Martinez wrung his hands as Diego approached. I came to warn Mr. Alvarez. The men in town, they're getting ready for something. Loading weapons, gathering men. They're planning to make an example of him." Diego's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried authority. "Thank you for the warning. Get your family somewhere safe. The next few days might get complicated." After Martinez left, the brothers regrouped in the kitchen. The morning light was growing stronger, revealing the changes they'd made to the farm overnight. Motion sensors hidden in the grass, remote triggers, buried at strategic points, firing positions carefully prepared. "They'll come soon," Emilio said. His unseeing eyes turned toward the window. "El Lobo won't wait long after the deadline passes. Let them come." Diego's voice was cold. "They think they're hunting a helpless blind man. Instead, they're walking into a trap." Javier's voice came over the radio again. More movement on the main road. 2 SUVs, heavily loaded, heading toward town. They're gathering their forces. "Many men can El Lobo field?" Mateo asked. "Local sources say he has about 30 dedicated gunmen," Diego answered. "But he can call in more from other territories if needed." 30 against 3, Mateo grinned. "Seems almost unfair to them." "Don't get cocky," Diego warned. "They have resources, local support, and nothing to lose. This won't be easy." Emilio stood, his hand finding his cane. "I should make my morning rounds. Keep up appearances." "Too dangerous," Diego protested, but Emilio shook his head. "They're watching. Any change in routine will alert them that something's different. Besides," he smiled, "this is still my farm. I won't hide in my own house." The brothers watched as their father made his way into the fields, his cane tapping steadily against the ground. To the cartel observers, he would appear unchanged, just a blind farmer going about his morning routine. They couldn't see the steel in his spine, the quiet defiance in his movements. "He's the bravest man I know," Mateo said softly. "Always has been," Diego agreed. "Now it's our turn to be worthy of that courage." The sun climbed higher, burning away. The morning mist. In his sniper's nest, Javier maintained his vigilant watch. Mateo checked and rechecked his preparations, ensuring every trap was perfectly placed. Diego moved through the house and grounds, reviewing their defensive positions one final time. They were ready. Years of military training, combat experience, and brotherly bonds had prepared them for this moment. El Lobo thought he was dealing with a simple land grab, but he had unknowingly started a war he couldn't win. The deadline approached. Soon the cartel would make their move, expecting to find a helpless blind farmer. Instead, they would face 3 of the most dangerous men in the special forces, fighting on their home ground, protecting their father and their legacy. The storm was coming. But this time, the Alvarez family would not be the ones caught in it. They would be the ones controlling. A darkness settled over the Alvarez farm like a heavy blanket, broken only by the faint starlight and a sliver of moon. In his sniper's nest atop the water tower, Javier tracked movement through his night vision scope. 3 black SUVs approached slowly, their headlights off, creeping along the back roads that led to the farm. "Contact," he whispered into his radio. 3 vehicles approaching from the south access road, 12 men, maybe 15, armed with rifles and what looks like incendiary devices. Diego's voice crackled back, calm and measured. Confirmed. Mateo, status? All charges set. Remote detonators ready. They hit any of my markers, we'll have one hell of a show. Inside the farmhouse, Emilio sat in his favorite chair, head tilted slightly as he listened to the approaching vehicles. His cane rested across his lap, his fingers tracing the hidden catch that concealed its deadly surprise. They're being cautious, Diego observed from his position near the front window. Coming in silent, spread out. These aren't the usual thugs. Lobo doesn't send amateurs for important jobs, Emilio said quietly. These will be his best men. The SUVs stopped half a mile from the farm, engines cutting out simultaneously. Through his scope, Javier watched as dark figures emerged, moving. With military precision, they gathered briefly around one man, clearly the leader, before spreading out in a practiced assault formation. They're splitting into 3 teams, Javier reported. 2 flanking groups, 1 main force coming straight up the drive. Leaders. With the center group. Let them get closer, Diego commanded. Javier, take out their transport when I give the word. Mateo, wait for my signal before triggering any charges. We want them committed to the attack. The cartel soldiers moved through the darkness with confidence, their weapons ready. The center group carried torches and containers of accelerant. They weren't here to negotiate. This was meant to be a message to anyone else who might think of defying El Lobo. Emilio's acute hearing picked up their approach. The soft crunch of boots on gravel, the gentle clinking of equipment, whispered. Commands in Spanish. His expression remained serene, but his grip tightened slightly on his cane. Main force approaching the front gate, Javier whispered. Flanking teams moving through the cornfields on either side. Hold, Diego ordered. Let them think they have. Surprise. The attackers reached the edge of the farmyard. One of them pulled out bolt cutters, moving to breach the gate. Others readied their torches, preparing to set the fields ablaze. Now, Diego commanded. Javier's rifle barked once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. The shots were barely louder than hand claps thanks to his suppressor. But the effects were devastating. The SUV's gas tanks erupted in quick succession, turning their escape route into a wall of flame. The cartel soldiers reacted instantly, diving for cover, but they were already in Mateo's kill zone. Remote charges detonated in carefully planned sequences, forcing them to move exactly where the brothers wanted them. Southfield is hot, Mateo called out. They're moving toward the barn, just like we planned. Through his scope, Javier picked his targets with clinical precision. A cartel soldier raising his rifle to fire at the house. Another trying to organize a counterattack. The team leader attempting to call for backup on his radio. Each fell silently, precisely, creating confusion. In the attacking force. Contact west, Diego reported calmly. 3 trying to breach the kitchen door. The sound of suppressed gunfire followed, then silence. Scratch 3. The remaining cartel soldiers realized they were under attack from multiple directions, but their training held. They took cover behind farm equipment and storage sheds, returning fire at the house while trying to spot their attackers. They're good, Javier observed. Maintaining discipline under fire, professional. Won't save them, Diego responded. Mateo, light up the east trap. A series of explosions walked across the farmyard, driving the attackers from their cover. Javier's rifle spoke again, picking off those who broke into the open. The few who kept their heads down soon found themselves engaged by Diego, who moved through the shadows of the farm buildings like a ghost, appearing and disappearing before they could effectively return fire. Inside the house, Emilio remained seated, listening to the battle unfold around him. His trained ear followed the action, Javier's precise shots from the water tower, Mateo's explosions hurting the attackers, Diego's close-quarters elimination of threats. His sons moved like a well-oiled machine, years of training in combat, experience turning the farm into a killing ground. A window shattered somewhere upstairs, boot steps on broken glass. Someone had managed to breach the house. Emilio smiled slightly, remaining perfectly still in his chair as heavy footsteps approached the living room. Found the old man, a voice called out in Spanish. Time to send. El Lobo's message. You're welcome to try, Emilio responded in the same language. His thumb found the catch on his cane. The intruder had just enough time to register surprise before Emilio moved. The cane's hidden blade flashed in the darkness, guided by years of practice and the perfect acoustics of his own home. A quiet thud, a softer gurgle, then silence. "Dad?" Diego's voice came over the radio. "Everything okay in there?" "Just fine, son. Though someone will need to clean the carpet later." Outside, the battle was turning decisively. The cartel soldiers, used to intimidating civilians and fighting local police, found themselves hopelessly outmatched against 3 special forces operators fighting on their home ground. Every attempt to maneuver was met with precise rifle fire or devastating explosions. Every breach point had been anticipated and prepared for. 6 down in the north field, Javier reported. 3 more pinned behind the tractor. They're trying to reach someone on their radios, but I've got their frequencies jammed. 4 more scattered in the west cornfield, Mateo added. They're lost out there, moving in circles thanks to the charges. Diego's voice was coldly professional. Herd them toward the barn. Time to end this. The remaining cartel soldiers, realizing they were being systematically eliminated, began to break. Training gave way to panic as more of their companions fell to unseen attackers. Some tried to run for the burning vehicles, only to be cut down by Javier's precise fire. Others, crawling through the cornfields, found themselves facing Diego's silent efficiency or Mateo's lethal traps. "Movement at the far fence," Javier called out. 2 making a break for it. "Let one go," Diego ordered. "El Lobo needs to get the message." Javier's rifle cracked once more. 1 runner fell. The other, spurred by terror, ran faster, disappearing into the darkness beyond the farm's boundaries. The entire engagement had lasted less than 15 minutes. The farm's defenses, prepared by 3 of the military's finest operators, had turned what was meant to be a show of force into a devastating defeat for the cartel. "Clear," Diego called after completing a final sweep. "Mateo, start cleanup. Javier, maintain overwatch in case they sent a second wave." Inside the house, Emilio hadn't moved from his chair. Diego found him there, still holding his cane, looking as peaceful as if he'd been listening to a Sunday sermon rather than a pitched battle. 15 confirmed, Diego reported. 1 got away, as planned. No survivors among the rest. Emilio nodded slowly. El Lobo won't take this well. He's never lost men like this before, not in his own territory. Good. Diego's voice was hard. Let him know what he's dealing with. This isn't about land anymore. He threatened our family, Mateo's voice came over the radio. Found their radios, high-end military gear. These weren't street thugs, they were trained professionals. Which means El Lobo has resources we need to consider, Diego mused. He'll call in more men, better equipment. This was just his first move. Javier joined the conversation from his perch. Areas clear to the horizon. No backup forces, no observation. Teams. They thought this would be a simple hit and run. The brothers converged on the house, moving with the same fluid efficiency they'd shown in combat. Each had already begun processing the engagement, analyzing what worked and what could be improved. They'll come again, Emilio said as his sons gathered in the kitchen. El Lobo can't afford to look weak, not in front of the other cartels, not in front of his own men. Diego nodded, cleaning his weapon with practiced movements. We expected that. This was just to show him what he's dealing with. Next time he'll come prepared for a real fight. His men were good, Mateo observed, checking his remaining detonators. Ex-military, probably Mexican Special Forces or Marines. Their movements, their equipment, all top tier. Not good enough, Javier said simply, his rifle across his knees as he maintained it. Emilio listened to his sons discussing the battle with professional detachment, pride mixing with concern in his chest. They were magnificent. Everything a father could hope for in his children. But he knew the price of their excellence, the cost of becoming the kind of men who could face cartel soldiers without hesitation. The survivor will reach El Lobo within the hour, Diego continued. He'll report facing a professional military force, probably assume we hired mercenaries. That works in our favor. Let him think he's dealing with hired guns rather than family. He'll call in reinforcements, Mateo predicted. Probably try to gather intel first, figure out what he's really facing. Good. Diego's smile was predatory. That gives us time to prepare a proper welcome. The brothers worked through the night, cleaning up evidence of the battle while preparing for the inevitable next phase. Mateo retrieved his unexploded charges, repositioning them in new configurations. Javier maintained his vigilant watch, scanning for any sign of cartel scouts or drones. Diego coordinated their efforts while establishing new defensive positions. Dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The farm looked peaceful in the early morning light, showing little sign of the violence that had occurred hours before. Emilio sat on his porch, listening to the familiar sounds of morning while his sons continued their preparations. They burned 3 of my best cornfields, he commented as Diego passed by. Sorry about that, Dad. Mateo got a little enthusiastic with the charges. Better the corn than the house, Emilio smiled slightly. Your mother would never forgive us if we let them burn down her kitchen. The joke carried weight. Memories of their mother, of growing up on this farm, of everything they were fighting to protect. Diego squeezed his father's shoulder before moving on, checking the perimeter one more time. In his sniper's nest, Javier watched the sun rise through his scope, scanning methodically for any sign of cartel activity. Mateo finished concealing. His last charge, the farm's defenses now even more deadly than before. The survivor would have reached El Lobo by now, telling his tale of invisible attackers, precise rifle fire, and devastating explosions. The cartel leader would be furious, his authority challenged, his best men eliminated with surgical efficiency. He'll come himself next time, Emilio predicted. His unseeing eyes turned toward the rising sun. A man like El Lobo can't let this go unanswered. We're counting on it, Diego replied. Better to deal with him directly than play cat and mouse with his men. The morning wind carried the scent of gunpowder and burned crops across the farm. Somewhere in town, El Lobo would be, planning his response, gathering his forces, preparing to crush these unknown defenders who dared to challenge his authority. But on the Alvarez farm, 3 brothers continued their preparations with professional focus, while their blind father sat peaceful and unafraid, listening to the sounds of his land coming awake. They had sent their message. This family would not be intimidated, this land would not be taken. The real war was just beginning. El Lobo stood at his office window watching the sunrise paint the town in shades of gold and shadow. Behind him, his surviving soldier knelt on the floor, still trembling as he finished his report of the night's disaster. 15 of his best men dead, 3 vehicles destroyed, and a blind farmer's farm standing untouched. Professional operators, the soldier repeated, his voice shaking. They had the whole property wired. Snipers, explosives, close-quarters specialists. They knew exactly what they were doing. El Lobo's reflection showed no emotion, but his fingers tightened on the crystal tumbler in his hand until it cracked. Get out. As the door closed behind the survivor, El Lobo pulled out his phone. Call everyone. I want our best people here by nightfall, and find out who the old man hired. I want to know everything. Back at the Alvarez farm, Diego monitored the cartel's radio frequencies, while Javier maintained his watch from the water tower. Mateo worked on reinforcing their defenses, adding new surprises for any future attackers. Movement in town, Javier reported through the radio. Lots of vehicles arriving. Military-grade stuff. They're gathering at El Lobo's compound. Diego nodded grimly. He's calling in his elite forces. Last night got his attention. Inside the kitchen, Emilio prepared breakfast as if it were any other morning. His movements were precise, practiced, each utensil and ingredient exactly where he knew it would be. The smell of fresh coffee and cooking food filled the house, a surreal normality against the tension of their situation. Someone's coming up the drive, Javier's voice crackled over the radio. Single vehicle, civilian truck. I know him. Miguel Santos used to work security for the cartel before going independent. Let him approach, Diego ordered. But stay ready. Miguel's truck stopped at the gate. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, clearly aware he was in someone's crosshairs. I need to speak with Emilio Alvarez. I have information he needs to hear. Diego met him at the gate, searching him for weapons before leading him to the house. Miguel's eyes darted professionally around the property, noting signs of last night's battle that most would miss. In the kitchen, Emilio turned toward the sound of their footsteps. "Miguel Santos, it's been a while since you visited my farm." "For good reason, Don Emilio." Miguel's voice carried respect tinged with fear. "El Lobo, he's not like the others. What happened last night, it's pushed him over the edge. He's calling in people, real monsters, professional killers from all over Mexico." Diego watched Miguel carefully as the man continued. "He's offering big money for information about your defenders. Word is he's even reached out to corrupt military officials for help identifying them." "Why are you telling us this?" Diego asked, his voice neutral but threatening. Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "I owe Don Emilio. Years ago, when my daughter was sick and I couldn't afford the medicine, he helped without asking anything in return. Not many men like that left around here." Emilio nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miguel. Is there anything else?" "Lobo. He's not just planning another attack. He's looking to make an example. He sent men into town watching, gathering information about everyone who visits the farm. He's planning something big." After Miguel left, the brothers gathered. In the kitchen, Diego relayed the information to Javier and Mateo over the radio, while Emilio sat quietly, listening. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Diego told his father. "If they're gathering intelligence, planning something bigger—" "This is my home," Emilio said firmly. "I won't be driven from it by threats." "Dad," Mateo's voice came over the radio, "at least let us take you into town for supplies." "We're running low on some essentials," Emilio smiled slightly. "You boys worry too much. I've been going to town every Wednesday for 20 years. If I stop now, it will only confirm their suspicions that something has changed here." "At least, let me go with you," Diego insisted, "and announce to everyone that something's different." "No, I'll go as I always do. Rosa's father drives me in his truck. I do my shopping. We come back. Anything else will only draw attention." The brothers exchanged looks, knowing their father's tone. Once his mind was made up, there was no changing it. "Javier, maintain overwatch. On the farm," Diego ordered. "Mateo, get those new charges set. I'll shadow Dad into town, stay out of sight." "Be careful," Emilio said as he prepared to leave. "El Lobo's men will be watching the town." "We're more worried about you, old man," Mateo replied, but there was tension in his joke. Mr. Martinez's truck arrived right on schedule. Diego watched from concealment as his father made his way to the vehicle, cane tapping steadily against the ground, the perfect picture of a blind farmer going about his routine. As the truck pulled away, Diego mounted a dirt bike hidden in one of the storage sheds. He would parallel their route into town, staying off the main roads, ready to respond if needed. In town, life appeared normal on the surface, but tension ran underneath. People hurried about their business, avoiding eye contact, speaking in whispers. Black SUVs with tinted windows cruised the streets slowly, a show of cartel presence and power. Emilio moved through the farmer's market with practiced ease, his cane finding familiar paths as Mr. Martinez helped him select supplies. His acute hearing picked up the whispers, the fears, the speculation about last night's events at his farm. Diego watched from various vantage points, noting cartel soldiers positioned strategically around the market. They were trying to be subtle, dressed in civilian clothes, but their military bearing gave them away to his trained eye. "They're hurting him," he whispered into his radio. Subtle movements, positioning themselves to control his possible routes. "Want us to come in?" Mateo asked, tension in his voice. "Negative. Hold position at the farm. Dad's almost done shopping." But as Emilio and Mr. Martinez headed back toward their truck, a commotion erupted at the far end of the market. Shouting, the sound of breaking glass, people running, a perfect distraction. "Contact," Diego's voice cracked over the radio. "They're moving on, Dad." He was already running, pushing through the crowd, but he was too far away. The cartel soldiers moved with professional precision, using the chaos to mask their approach. Within seconds, they had separated Emilio from Mr. Martinez. "Don't interfere," one soldier warned Martinez, showing him a pistol concealed under his jacket. "Take your truck and go home. Forget what you saw here." Diego arrived in time to see a black SUV pulling away, his father inside. The crowd parted. Around him, their eyes averted, no one willing to acknowledge what they'd just witnessed. "They have Dad," he reported, his voice tight with controlled fury. 3 vehicles, heading east on Main Street. "I've got them," Javier's voice came back. "Just crested the hill outside town. Looks like they're heading toward El Lobo's compound." "Can you take the shot?" "Negative. Too many civilians in the area, and Dad's in the middle vehicle." Diego's mind raced through options as he returned to his dirt bike. "Mateo, status on the farm?" "Quiet here. Want me to trigger some of the charges? Create a distraction?" "No. They'll be expecting that. They'll have contingencies in place." Diego kicked the bike to life. "Keep the farm secure. Javier, maintain overwatch but don't engage. I'll track them." The SUVs moved through town with deliberate slowness, a show of power and control. Everyone who saw them knew Emilio Alvarez was inside, and everyone understood the message. This is what happens to those who defy El Lobo. Inside the lead vehicle, Emilio sat calmly between 2 armed guards. His cane had been taken, but his posture remained dignified, unafraid. "El Lobo wants to talk business," one guard said, trying to sound professional. "There's nothing to discuss," Emilio replied quietly. "My answer hasn't changed," the guard laughed. "Trust me, old man. After today, you'll be begging to sell." The convoy reached El Lobo's compound, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. High walls surrounded manicured grounds, security cameras covered every approach, and armed guards patrolled with military precision. From his concealed position, Diego observed the compound's defenses. At least 20 men visible on the perimeter, professional setup. They've upgraded their security since last night. "Makes sense," Mateo replied. "They're expecting retaliation for taking Dad." "How do you want to play this?" Javier asked. Diego watched as his father was led into the main building. "We go to war," he said simply. Back at the farm, Mateo began preparing specialized charges, while Javier adjusted his sniper position to cover approaches from the compound's direction. Both brothers knew that taking the compound would be nothing like defending the farm. This would require perfect coordination, timing, and a level of violence they hadn't shown yet. In his office, El Lobo studied Emilio with cold curiosity. "I underestimated you, old man. Those were impressive defenders you hired. Ex-military? Private contractors?" Emilio remained silent, his unseeing eyes fixed somewhere past El Lobo's shoulder. "No matter. By now they've probably realized their employer has been taken. They'll either run or try something foolish. Either way, they're not your concern anymore." El Lobo leaned forward. "Now let's discuss the real price of your farm." "There is no price," Emilio said calmly. "That land belongs to my family. It's not for sale." El Lobo's smile vanished. "Look around you, viejo. The world has changed. Territory, power, control. These are the new currencies. Your outdated ideas about family land and legacy mean nothing." "You're wrong," Emilio replied. "Family means everything. Legacy is what gives men roots, gives them something to fight for." "Fight?" El Lobo laughed. "You're blind, alone, surrounded by my men. What exactly do you think you can fight for, eh?" Small smile crossed Emilio's face. "You still don't understand. I'm not the one you need to worry about fighting." As if in answer to his words, a distant explosion echoed from the direction of town. El Lobo moved to his window, watching as smoke rose from one of his warehouses. "Sir!" A guard burst into the office. "We're under attack. Multiple positions." El Lobo's face darkened with rage. "These mercenaries dare to attack my compound. Call in everyone. I want them found and eliminated." But Emilio's smile never wavered. He listened to the growing chaos outside, recognizing the pattern of explosions, the precise cracks of Javier's rifle, the systematic destruction of El Lobo's infrastructure. "Those aren't mercenaries," he said quietly. "That's family." Miles away, Diego approached the compound from the blind side, using the distraction of Mateo's explosions and Javier's precision shooting to mask his movement. His brothers were systematically destroying El Lobo's support network, warehouses, security positions, communication centers. "Remember," he said into his radio, "we're not just rescuing Dad. We're sending a message. By sunrise, everyone needs to know what happens when you threaten an Alvarez." The night was just beginning, and the real war was about to start. Thunder rolled across the evening sky as Diego surveyed the farm's defenses through his tactical scope. The approaching storm would work in their favor, providing cover and limiting visibility. Behind him, Mateo finished wiring the last of his enhanced explosive arrays while Javier maintained his watch from the reinforced sniper nest they'd constructed after the first battle. "Movement on the southern approach," Javier's voice crackled, through their encrypted radio. "Multiple vehicles running dark, military transport trucks mixed with SUVs. I count at least 30 men in the first wave." Inside the farmhouse, now transformed into a fortified position, Emilio sat calmly in his chair, head tilted slightly as he listened to the approaching vehicles. His presence was both inspiration and purpose. They had rescued him from El Lobo's compound 2 days ago, and now the cartel leader was coming with everything he had. "They're better equipped this time," Mateo observed, checking his detonators. "Night vision gear, body armor, heavy weapons. El Lobo's not taking any chances." Diego nodded grimly. "He can't afford to fail again. 3 defeats in a row would destroy his reputation." He keyed his radio. "Everyone in position. Remember, we're fighting on our terms, our ground. Make them pay for every inch." The convoy stopped just beyond the farm's perimeter. Through his scope, Javier watched as El Lobo himself stepped out of an armored SUV, surveying the farm with cold calculation. The cartel leader had brought an army, professional soldiers armed with military-grade weapons and equipment. "They're deploying in tactical formations," Javier reported. 3-man teams, good spacing, proper support positions. These aren't street thugs, they're trained military. "Expected that," Diego replied. After we hit his compound, El Lobo called in every professional he could buy. "Mateo, status on the outer perimeter? First line is hot. Second and third backups are ready. Got some special surprises waiting if they try to use those transport trucks as cover." The storm clouds thickened overhead, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cartel forces as they moved into position. Through his scope, Javier could see El Lobo coordinating with his commanders, pointing out approaches to the farm. "They're going to try to overwhelm us with numbers," Diego analyzed. "Hit multiple points simultaneously, keep us from concentrating our defense." "Let them try," Mateo's voice carried a predator's anticipation. "I've got something special planned for mass attacks." The radio crackled, and El Lobo's voice came through their intercepted frequency. "Remember, I want the old man alive. Kill anyone else you find, but Emilio Alvarez belongs to me." Lightning flashed again, closer now, and thunder rolled across the farmland. The cartel forces began their advance, moving in coordinated teams through the rain. Night vision goggles gave them confidence in the growing darkness, but Mateo had prepared for that. "First team approaching the south fence," Javier reported. "Second team moving through the cornfield. Third team, multiple teams moving on all approaches." "Hold," Diego commanded. "Let them commit to the attack." The cartel soldiers moved with professional caution, probing for traps, covering each other's advance. But they were fighting on the Alvarez brothers' ground, where every approach had been prepared, every angle calculated. "Now," Diego ordered. Mateo triggered his first array. Dozens of magnesium flares erupted across the battlefield, their intense light overwhelming the cartel soldiers' night vision gear. Screams of pain and confusion filled the air as men clawed at their useless goggles. Javier's rifle began its deadly work, each shot precisely placed. The cartel's forward observers fell one by one, cutting off tactical coordination between teams. Through his scope, he saw El Lobo shouting orders, trying to regain control of the situation. "Multiple teams disorganized," Javier reported. "They're bunching up behind the transport trucks?" "Perfect," Mateo grinned, triggering his second surprise. Shaped charges detonated beneath the trucks, turning their supposed cover into death traps. Shrapnel scythed through the cartel ranks, forcing them to scatter. but each direction they ran had been prepared for, channeling them into preset kill zones. Diego moved through the farm's defensive positions like a ghost, engaging any teams that managed to push through the outer perimeter. His suppressed rifle made only quiet coughs in the storm, but each shot found its mark with lethal precision. "West barrier breached," Javier called out. 3-man team moving toward the house. "Got them," Diego responded, shifting positions smoothly. The team moved well, covering each other's advance, but they never saw Diego. 3 quiet shots, 3 bodies falling in the rain. Professional soldiers were still soldiers, and the Alvarez brothers had trained their entire lives to be something more. Inside the house, Emilio listened to the battle with calm focus. His acute hearing painted a picture of the fighting, Javier's precise shots from his elevated position, Mateo's explosions reshaping the battlefield, Diego's quiet efficiency eliminating threats. His sons moved like a perfect machine. Years of training and combat experience turning the farm into a killing ground. "Second wave forming up," Javier warned. "El Lobo's sending in his heavy weapons teams. They've got mounted guns on the remaining vehicles." "Shift to position 2, Diego ordered. "Mateo, time for the big surprise." "Been waiting for this," Mateo replied with satisfaction. The cartel's heavy weapons opened up, filling the air with automatic fire. Tracers cut through the rain as they attempted to suppress the farm's defenders. But Mateo had prepared for this, too. His largest charges, carefully positioned along the likely vehicle approaches, detonated in sequence. The explosions walked across the battlefield, destroying vehicles and throwing their mounted weapons into chaos. The rain of bullets faltered as gunners lost their positions or their weapons. Through his scope, Javier watched El Lobo's expression change from confidence to concern. "They're trying to regroup," Javier reported. "El Lobo's pulling his men back, looking for a new approach." "Keep the pressure on," Diego commanded. "Don't give them time to reorganize." The battle shifted into a new phase as the cartel forces, their initial assault broken, tried to adapt. They were professionals, used to adjusting tactics under fire, but the Alvarez brothers had prepared for everything. When they tried to use the storm for cover, Mateo's thermal triggers detected them. When they attempted to find blind spots in the farm's defenses, they found Diego waiting. When their commanders tried to coordinate new attacks, Javier's rifle eliminated them. "This is getting expensive for them," Mateo observed, triggering another set of charges to break up a flanking attempt. "El Lobo's lost at least 20 men and most of his vehicles." "He won't stop," Diego replied, moving to engage a team that had nearly reached the barn. "He's committed too much to back down now." Through the command frequency, they heard El Lobo's growing fury as his expensive military professionals were systematically destroyed by unseen defenders. His orders became more desperate, demanding his men push forward regardless of casualties. "They're getting sloppy," Javier reported. "Frustration's making them take chances. 2 teams moving straight up the main drive. Their training's breaking down," Diego analyzed. "They're used to being the elite, the ones with all the advantages, not used to being outmatched." The storm reached its peak, rain pouring down in sheets as lightning split the sky. The battlefield was illuminated in stark flashes, bodies sprawled in the mud, burning vehicles casting orange light through the rain, cartel soldiers trying to advance through a killing ground that had been prepared by masters of warfare. Inside the house, Emilio rose from his chair. His acute hearing had picked up something the others hadn't noticed yet. A team had managed to reach the house's blind side, moving in the thunder's cover. "Diego," he called quietly into his radio. 3 men coming up the east wall. They're good, moving between lightning flashes." Diego was already moving, but he knew he wouldn't reach the house in time. "Dad, get to the safe room." "No need," Emilio replied calmly. His hands found the hidden panel behind his chair, retrieving the shotgun concealed there. "Your mother always insisted we hide weapons around the house. Blind doesn't mean helpless." The cartel team breached the kitchen door with professional efficiency, but they weren't prepared for what waited inside. Emilio, whose hearing had been honed by decades of blindness, tracked their movements perfectly. The shotgun roared twice in the darkness. "East side clear." he reported quietly. Outside, the battle was turning into a rout. The cartel soldiers, their professional veneer cracking, began to fall back in disorder. Their tactical retreat turned into a desperate flight as Mateo's remaining charges and Javier's precise fire turned every escape route into a gauntlet. El Lobo's pulling back, Javier reported, watching through his scope as the cartel leader got into his armored SUV. He's leaving his men behind. Typical cartel boss, Diego said coldly. Brave until things go wrong. Mateo, cut off their retreat. Let's finish this. The remaining cartel forces found themselves trapped between the farm's defenses and the deadly zones Mateo had prepared behind them. Professional training gave way to panic as they realized there was nowhere safe to run. Throwing down weapons, Javier called out. 6 survivors surrendering on the north edge, 3 more by the burned-out trucks. Diego moved to secure the prisoners, his movements still careful in case of tricks. But these men were broken, elite soldiers who had just seen their unit destroyed by defenders they could barely fight back against. Search them and secure them in the barn, he ordered. We'll decide what to do with them later. The storm began to pass, the rain slackening to a drizzle. Dawn was approaching, and with it came the full revelation of the night's violence. The farm's approaches were littered with bodies and burning vehicles. El Lobo's professional army lay, broken and scattered across the battlefield they had expected to dominate. Inside the house, Diego found his father calmly making coffee, the shotgun resting on the kitchen table beside him. "Anyone want breakfast?" Emilio asked, as if they had just finished morning chores rather than a pitched battle. The brothers gathered, in the kitchen, performing weapons maintenance and damage assessment while their father cooked. It was a surreal scene, 4 men discussing a major battle over coffee and eggs. El Lobo lost at least 40 men, Javier reported, cleaning his rifle with practiced movements. Plus most of his professional soldiers and a lot of expensive equipment. He's not finished, Diego warned. A man like that with his reputation at stake, he'll escalate further. Let him, Mateo said, checking his remaining detonators. We've got something planned for whatever he brings next. Emilio listened to his son's planning and preparing, pride mixing with concern in his chest. They were magnificent, everything a father could hope for in his children. But he knew the cost of their excellence, the weight they carried from years of combat and killing. El Lobo will need time to recover from this, Diego analyzed. He lost too many men, too much equipment. He'll have to call in favors, find new professionals willing to take on this fight. Good, Javier said simply, his scope glinting in the early morning light. More targets. The sun rose over the Alvarez farm, revealing the full extent of the night's carnage. The defenses had held, the attackers had been destroyed, but everyone knew this was just another phase in an escalating war. El Lobo's reputation and authority had been severely damaged. He would have to respond with even greater force. But on the farm, 4 men shared breakfast and coffee, their weapons close at hand, their resolve unshaken. They had sent another message to El Lobo and his cartel. The Alvarez family would not be broken, would not be driven from their land. The war would continue, but they would face it as they faced everything. Together, protecting their home, their legacy, and most importantly, their family. El Lobo paced his office, rage radiating from every movement. The morning sun illuminated the maps and satellite photos spread across his desk, detailed images of the Alvarez farm and surrounding territory. 3 times he had attacked, and 3 times his forces had been destroyed. His reputation was in tatters, his authority questioned by rival cartels. The door opened, and his lieutenant entered. "They're here." 5 men filed into the office, their bearing unmistakably military. Their leader, a weathered man with a scar running down his left cheek, studied the maps without invitation. "Interesting tactical situation you have here." Colonel Sao. "Santiago," El Lobo acknowledged. "Your reputation precedes you." Santiago nodded slightly. His mercenary unit was known throughout Central America, ex-Special Forces operators who had turned their skills to more profitable ventures. They specialized in impossible tasks for clients who could afford their extreme rates. "Tell me about these defenders." Santiago requested, his eyes still on the maps. El Lobo's jaw tightened. Professional operators. 3 of them, maybe more. They've turned that farm into a fortress. My best men couldn't even get close. Santiago's fingers traced the farm's perimeter on the map. Your men were good, but they were still thinking like cartel soldiers. You're not fighting rival gangs here. These defenders, they're something else. That's why I called you, El Lobo said. Whatever it costs, I want them eliminated. Santiago looked up, his scarred face expressionless. Money's not the issue. We need time first, to study them, learn their patterns, understand how they think. Time? El Lobo slammed his fist on the desk. Every day they survive damages my authority. You want quick, hire more thugs to die. Santiago's voice was cold. You want victory, let us work properly. At the Alvarez farm, Diego monitored the surveillance feeds they'd set up after the last attack. Beside him, Javier cleaned his rifle while Mateo worked on modifying some of his explosive devices. Movement in town, Diego reported. 5 new players at El Lobo's compound. Military bearing but not cartel. Emilio sat in his chair, listening. Mercenaries? Has to be, Diego agreed. El Lobo's running out of options. He needs specialists who can match us. Santiago's group, Javier said without looking up from his saw them operate in Colombia. They're good. How good? Mateo asked. Good enough to make this interesting. Diego studied the surveillance footage more closely. They're not preparing for immediate action. Look at their movement patterns. They're setting up for observation first. Smart, Javier nodded. They'll want to study us before engaging. Emilio's hands found his cane, fingers tracing the hidden catch. These men, they're different from the others? Very, Diego confirmed. Ex-special forces, mostly from Latin American military units. They've been fighting in conflicts across Central and South America for years. They're professional, patient, and extremely dangerous. Then we adapt, Emilio said simply. The brothers spent the next days preparing, adjusting their defenses for this new type of opponent. Mateo modified his explosive arrays, making them more subtle and harder to detect. Javier established new sniper positions, knowing these enemies would be better at spotting the obvious ones. Diego coordinated their efforts while maintaining constant surveillance. Through their observation posts in town, they tracked Santiago's men as they methodically gathered intelligence. They're good, Diego admitted, watching footage of the mercenaries moving through town. See how they separate to cover more ground, always maintaining communication, never establishing patterns. They're talking to everyone, Mateo reported. From his surveillance position. Shop owners, farmers, even kids. Building a complete picture. Knowledge is power, Emilio said from his chair. Your mother taught you that. The mercenaries were thorough. They studied satellite images, interviewed people who had seen the previous battles, examined debris from destroyed vehicles. They were building a comprehensive understanding of their opponents. Late one night, as the brothers monitored their perimeter, Javier spotted movement. Contact, Northern Woods, 2-man team, well concealed. Let them observe, Diego ordered. They're testing our detection capabilities. Through his scope, Javier watched the mercenary scouts. Their movement was exemplary, using natural cover, moving only when sound would cover them, maintaining perfect coordination. They're better than the cartel soldiers, Javier acknowledged. Much better. That's why we're changing the game, Diego replied. Mateo, show them what you've prepared. Mateo triggered a series of small charges in the distance, not meant to harm, just to illuminate. The light revealed 3 more mercenary teams they hadn't detected, all quickly melting. Back into the darkness, message sent, Diego nodded. Let them know we see them. In his compound, Santiago watched the footage his teams returned with. His scarred face showed no emotion as he studied their observations. These aren't ordinary operators, he told El Lobo. Their setup is too perfect, too coordinated. They think like a single unit. What does that matter? El Lobo demanded. Can you eliminate them or not? Santiago's eyes narrowed. We'll need more men and better equipment. These defenders, they're personal. Personal? The way they fight, how they coordinate, their defensive positions. This isn't about money for them. They're protecting something more than just land, LEA. Lobo waved his hand dismissively. Whatever you need, just get it done. Over the next days, more mercenaries arrived in town. Elite operators from various military backgrounds, each bringing specialized skills and equipment. Santiago assembled them carefully, building a force that could match the Alvarez brothers' capabilities. At the farm, the defenders watched and prepared. They noted every new arrival, studied their movements, adapted their defenses accordingly. "They're bringing in heavy weapons," Javier reported, observing a midnight delivery through his scope. "Barrett 50 cals, AT-4 launchers, specialized breaching gear." "Not trying to hide their presence anymore," Diego noted. "They want us to see their preparations." "Psychological warfare," Emilio said quietly, "letting us know what's coming, the war." Tension built as both sides prepared for the inevitable clash. The mercenaries continued their careful observation while gathering their forces. The brothers adjusted and refined their defenses, knowing they would face their most dangerous opponents yet. A week into the standoff, a mercenary approached the farm openly, walking up the main drive with his hands visible. Diego met him at the gate, weapon ready but not aimed. "Colonel Santiago sends a message," the man said calmly. "Professional courtesy. You've got skills we respect. There's no need for this to get messy. Take the old man and go. This land isn't worth dying for." Diego's response was equally calm. "Give Santiago a message back. This isn't about land. It's about family. He's smart enough to understand what that means." The mercenary nodded slightly. "He thought you might say that. Wanted me to tell you. He's bringing in everyone. Full assault package. Whatever happens next, it won't be like the cartel attacks." "We know," Diego replied. "Tell him we'll be ready." After the messenger left, the brothers gathered in the kitchen. Emilio listened as they discussed the implications of Santiago's warning. "He's telling us how serious this will be," Diego analyzed. "These men aren't cartel thugs looking for easy victories. They're professionals who understand exactly what they're walking into." "Good," Javier said simply, checking his ammunition supplies. "Real opponents." "They'll come at night," Mateo predicted, working on a new type of charge. "Multiple vectors, coordinated teams. They'll try to overwhelm us with skill instead of numbers." Emilio's hands found his coffee cup, feeling the warmth. "These men, they're like you?" "Similar training," Diego confirmed. "Similar experiences. They've fought in the worst conflicts across Latin America. They're survivors." "Then they should understand," Emilio said quietly, "what it means to fight for something real." The brothers exchanged looks. Their father's words cut to the heart of the matter. These mercenaries were professionals, fighting for money. The Alvarez brothers fought for family, for legacy, for something that couldn't be bought or sold. That night, as they took their defensive positions, the farm was quieter than usual. No birds sang, no insects chirped, as if nature itself sensed the coming. "Violence. Movement," Javier reported from his sniper's nest. "Multiple teams approaching from all directions. Very slow, very careful." "I see them," Diego acknowledged. "At least 30 operators moving in perfect coordination. Santiago's not taking any chances." "All charges armed," Mateo confirmed. "But they'll be looking for them. These guys know all the standard tricks." Through his scope, Javier watched the mercenaries advance. Their movement was perfect, using every scrap of cover, maintaining ideal spacing, watching for tripwires and pressure plates. They moved like shadows, each step calculated and precise. "They're good," Javier admitted. "Really good. But we're better," Diego replied, "because we're fighting for something more than money." In the house, Emilio sat in his chair, listening to the night. His acute hearing picked up sounds even his trained sons might miss. The subtle shift of combat gear, the whisper of tactical fabric, the nearly silent communications between approaching teams. "Santiago's with them," he said suddenly. 300 yards out, directing the operations. Diego checked his thermal scope, confirming his father's assessment. "He leads from the front. Respect for that, at least." The mercenaries continued their approach, moving with incredible skill and patience, They located and avoided Mateo's obvious charges, found and bypassed the standard kill zones, identified and accounted for the clear sniper positions. "They're good," Mateo whispered, "but they're finding what we want them to find." "Exactly," Diego agreed. "Let them think they've got us figured out." The attack, when it came, was masterfully coordinated. Multiple teams breached the perimeter simultaneously, using specialized equipment to detect and avoid traps. Their movement was fluid, their coordination perfect, their tactical awareness exceptional. But the Alvarez brothers had prepared for this. The obvious defenses were decoys, leading the mercenaries exactly where they wanted them. "Now," Diego commanded. Mateo triggered his real charges, hidden in places no normal demolitions expert would consider. The explosions were precisely calculated, designed not to kill but to separate and disorient. The mercenaries adapted instantly, shifting to secondary plans, but Javier was ready. His shots came from positions they hadn't detected, targeting their communication gear and specialized equipment rather than going for kills. "They're good," Javier reported, shifting positions smoothly, already adjusting, maintaining unit cohesion. "Expected that," Diego replied, moving to engage. "Make them work for every inch." The battle developed into a deadly game of cat and mouse, with both sides demonstrating exceptional skill and training. The mercenaries moved like ghosts, using every trick in their considerable playbook. The brothers responded with equal skill, turning their home ground into a tactical nightmare. Santiago coordinated his men masterfully, adapting to each new challenge, probing for weaknesses. But he soon realized something that El Lobo hadn't understood. He wasn't fighting hired guns defending a piece of land. He was fighting a family protecting their home. "These defenders," he spoke quietly into his radio, watching another team fall back under precise fire. "They're military, special forces like us, but they're fighting different." "Sir?" one of his team leaders questioned. "They're fighting personal," Santiago explained. "Every move calculated, every position supporting the others. They know this ground like they grew up here." Understanding dawned in his scarred face. "They did grow up here. That's why they're so good. They're not defending a farm. They're defending their home." The battle continued through the night, a deadly dance between highly trained operators. The mercenaries were exceptional, but they were fighting for money. The Alvarez brothers fought for family, and that made all the difference. By dawn, Santiago had lost a quarter of his men to injuries, though remarkably few to death. The brothers' tactics had focused on disabling rather than killing, a level of skill that impressed even the hardened mercenary commander. "Pull back," he ordered finally. "Tactical withdrawal. They've earned that much respect." As the mercenaries retreated in perfect order, Diego watched through his scope. "They'll be back. With better plans," Javier agreed. "Better equipment. More men." "Let them come," Mateo said, checking his remaining charges. "We'll be ready." In the growing light, they gathered in the kitchen. Emilio had coffee waiting, as he always did. The brothers cleaned their weapons and assessed the night's engagement while their father listened. "Santiago is different," Diego analyzed. "He understands what he's really fighting now. That makes him more dangerous. But also more cautious," Javier added. "He knows this isn't a normal contract anymore." Emilio's hands found his cane, feeling the worn wood that had supported him for so many years. Understanding brings choice. These men must now decide if money is worth dying for. The sun rose over the Alvarez farm, revealing signs of the night's combat. But unlike the cartel attacks, there were no bodies, no burning vehicles. This had been a battle between professionals, fought with skill rather than brutality. The war had entered a new phase. El Lobo had found worthy operators to challenge the Alvarez brothers. But in doing so, he had also found men who could understand what they were really fighting against. The next battle would be different. Santiago would come better prepared, with full knowledge of what he faced. But the brothers would be ready, defending their home, their father, their legacy. Because in the end, that's what it was always about. Family. Diego watched El Lobo's compound through his thermal scope, marking guard positions and patrol patterns. Beside him, Mateo reviewed the blueprints they'd obtained from a former cartel lieutenant, a man who'd decided that survival was worth more than loyalty. Javier maintained overwatch from a distant rooftop, his rifle trained on key positions. Securities. Been doubled since we took Dad, Diego observed. El Lobo's not taking any chances. Santiago's men are coordinating the defense, Mateo added. See how the patrols overlap? No blind spots, no patterns to exploit. Through his scope, Javier tracked the mercenaries' movements. They're good, professional. This won't be like last. Time. No, Diego agreed. This time we're the attackers. Changes everything. Inside the compound, Emilio sat calmly in his cell, listening to the guards' movements. His acute hearing picked up their patrol patterns, the shift changes, the subtle differences between cartel thugs and Santiago's professional operators. Your sons are coming, Santiago had told him earlier, his scarred face thoughtful. You know that, yes? They are my sons, Emilio had replied simply. Santiago had nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then there will be violence. Much violence. Now, as night deepened over the compound, the brothers prepared for their most dangerous operation yet. They weren't defending prepared positions this time. They were assaulting a fortified compound defended by professional operators. Timeline? Mateo asked, checking his specialized breaching charges. We move at midnight, Diego replied. El Jaguar, El Lobo's second-in-command, has a meeting in town. That pulls some security with him. Still leaves Santiago's men, Javier noted. Plus regular cartel soldiers. Quality over quantity, Diego said. Santiago's professionals are the real threat. The cartel thugs are just noise. They moved into position as clouds covered the moon. Diego took point, advancing through blind spots they'd identified during days of observation. Mateo followed, his equipment bag loaded with specialized breaching tools. Javier remained in his overwatch position, ready to provide cover and elimination of priority targets. Guard change in 30 seconds, Javier reported. Santiago's team on the north wall, cartel thugs on the east. Diego timed their approach perfectly, using the guard change to mask their movement. Years of special forces training combined with brotherly coordination made them nearly invisible as they approached the compound's outer wall. Mateo placed his charges with surgical precision, specialized explosives designed to breach without, alerting the entire compound. Charges set. Ready on your mark. Execute, Diego commanded. The breaching charges detonated with muffled thumps, creating precise holes in the compound's defenses. Before the dust settled, the brothers were through, moving like shadows through the complex. 2 targets, west. Corridor, Javier called out. Santiago's men. Diego engaged the mercenaries with lethal efficiency. No gunshots, just the quiet whisper of his combat knife and the soft thuds of bodies hitting the ground. These men were good, but Diego had been training for this moment his entire life. Inside his cell, Emilio heard the subtle sounds of combat. His enhanced hearing picked up the quiet deaths, the careful movement, the professional efficiency of his sons at work. He smiled slightly, remembering teaching them to move silently through the cornfields as children. 3 more incoming, Javier warned. Cartel soldiers this time, sloppy, armed with automatics. Mateo handled them before they could raise the alarm, using a flashbang to disorient them before taking them down with precise hand-to-hand techniques. The bodies were quickly hidden, maintaining their stealth advantage. But Santiago's men were professionals. One of them noticed something wrong, reaching for his radio. Javier's rifle cracked once, the sound suppressed but still audible in the night air. Compromise in 30 seconds, Diego calculated. Move to phase 2. Mateo's secondary charges detonated across the compound, creating multiple distractions. Ammunition stores exploded, vehicles burst into flames, and chaos erupted as Cartel. Soldiers rushed to respond. El Jaguar's convoy is returning early, Javier reported. 5 minutes out. Doesn't matter, Diego replied, moving deeper into the compound. We're committed now. They fought their way through the complex, each brother using their specialized skills to maximum effect. Mateo's explosives created confusion and cleared paths. Javier's precision fire eliminated key threats and denied enemy movement. Diego's close-quarters expertise dealt with immediate opposition. Santiago's voice crackled over the compound's radio channels. Professional breach team, multiple operators. Don't engage directly, contain and delay. He knows it's us, Mateo said, setting another charge. Doesn't help him, Diego replied. We're not here to fight fair. They reached the detention block, finding Santiago waiting for them. The mercenary commander stood calmly, his scarred face expressionless. You could have asked, he said simply. Professional courtesy. Would you have helped? Diego asked, his weapon trained on Santiago's chest. Perhaps. This contract, it's not what we usually do. Santiago's eyes showed respect. Your father, he's a brave man. Reminds me of my own. Then step aside, Diego suggested. Santiago considered for a moment, then nodded slightly. El Lobo's war, not mine. But others won't see it that way. He stepped aside, allowing them to pass. Behind them, they heard him speaking into his radio. All mercenary units withdraw. Contract terminated. Emilio was waiting calmly when they reached his cell. You boys took your time. Traffic was bad, Mateo joked, breaching the lock. But their success had taken too long. El Jaguar's convoy had returned, and the compound was now swarming with cartel soldiers. Their exit route was compromised. New plan, Diego decided. Mateo, use the big surprise. Mateo grinned, pulling out a specialized device. Been saving this one. The explosion that followed was massive. Not one of Mateo's usual precision charges, but a carefully planned demolition that brought down an entire section of the compound's wall. The distraction allowed them to move, but it also brought every cartel soldier in the area running. Heavy opposition at the breach point, Javier reported. El Jaguar is coordinating personally. Perfect, Diego said. He's the one we want. They moved toward the breach point, engaging multiple cartel teams. These weren't Santiago's professionals. They were ordinary soldiers, dangerous but untrained for this level of combat. El Jaguar proved more challenging. El Lobo's second-in-command was ex-military himself, and he coordinated his men with skill. But he wasn't prepared for the level of violence the Alvarez brothers brought to bear. Javier, take him, Diego ordered. The shot came from an impossible angle, catching El Jaguar in the shoulder. As he fell, chaos erupted among his men. Without leadership, their resistance crumbled. But something was wrong. Through the chaos of combat, Diego heard Emilio's voice. Behind us! They turned to find Rosa's father, their trusted friend and information source, aiming a pistol at them. His hands shook, but his eyes were determined. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They have my family. Drop it, Marcus, Diego said calmly. You know how this ends. I don't have a choice. El Lobo will kill them. Emilio's voice cut through the tension. There are always choices, Marcus. Your daughter Rosa, wow, what will she think of this choice? The gun wavered. Tears ran down Marcus's face. I'm sorry, he whispered again. The shot came from Javier's position, precise, non-lethal, disarming Marcus without killing him. They left him there, wounded but alive, another victim of El Lobo's manipulation. Exit route compromised, Javier reported. Heavy cartel presence between us and the vehicles. Then we make a new route, Diego decided. Mateo? The youngest brother triggered his remaining charges, creating a series of explosions that ripped through the compound. Under cover of the chaos, they moved through the fire and smoke, carrying their father to safety. By the time El Lobo arrived at his burning compound, the Alvarez family was gone. His second-in-command was wounded, his defenses were in chaos, and his mercenaries had abandoned him. Back at the farm as dawn approached, the brothers assessed their situation. The rescue had succeeded, but at a cost. Their trusted friend had betrayed them, their enemies now knew their capabilities, and El Lobo would be more dangerous than ever. He'll come again, Diego said, cleaning his weapons, with everything he has. Let him come, Emilio replied calmly. We are Alvarez. We face our enemies together. Mateo checked his remaining explosives while Javier maintained watch from his sniper's nest. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. El Lobo's rage would know no bounds now. He would bring everything he had against them. But they would be ready. Because that's what the Alvarez family did. They stood together, they fought together, and they would win together. The sun rose over the farm, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Another day was beginning, and with it, preparations for the battles yet to come. But for now, they had their father back, they had their home, and they had each other. In the end, that was all that really mattered. A black military helicopter descended onto El Lobo's private landing pad, its rotors kicking up dust in the pre-dawn light. The man who stepped out wore the uniform of a Mexican army general, but his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had long ago traded honor for profit. General Rivera, El Lobo greeted him, noting the 4 heavily armed soldiers who accompanied him. "Welcome to my humble territory." Humble. Rivera's laugh was harsh. "You've lost 3 major engagements, had your compound breached, and let Santiago's mercenaries walk away. There's nothing humble about such failure." Inside the compound's conference room, El Lobo watched as Rivera studied detailed satellite images of the Alvarez farm. The general's expression remained neutral, but his fingers traced the defensive positions with professional interest. "These operators defending the farm," Rivera mused. "They're good. Military trained. Special forces, probably American. Can you eliminate them?" Rivera's smile was cold. "That's why you're paying me, isn't it? I'm bringing in special equipment. Weapons that aren't supposed to exist. By this time tomorrow, your problem will be solved." At the Alvarez farm, Javier tracked the helicopter's arrival through his scope. Military chopper at El Lobo's compound. Mexican army markings, but no official flight plan. "That's not good," Diego replied, studying the footage from their surveillance cameras. El Lobo's expanding his resources, going beyond cartel connections. Inside the house, Emilio sat with Mateo, who was nursing the leg wound he'd received during their escape. The injury wasn't severe, but it limited his mobility. "General Rivera," Emilio said suddenly, his unseeing eyes turned toward the window. "It has to be. He's the only corrupt general with enough influence in this region." "You know him?" Diego asked. "Know of him. He sells military hardware to cartels, provides troops when needed. Very expensive, very effective. A truck pulled up to the farm's gate, one of the local farmers they trusted. But instead of their usual supplier, a different man stepped out. Tall, muscular, with the bearing of a soldier. Carlos Mendez," the man introduced himself when Diego met him at the gate. "I represent certain interests that oppose El Lobo. We need to talk." After thoroughly searching him, they brought Carlos to the kitchen. He studied each brother carefully before speaking. "The Sinaloa cartel sends its regards," he said finally. "El Lobo's expansion has become problematic. His obsession with your farm has created opportunities for others." "We're not interested in cartel politics," Diego replied coldly. "Perhaps not, but you should be interested in this." Carlos placed a folder on the table. "General Rivera brought more than just himself to the party. He's got advanced weapons, electronic warfare equipment, things that could change the game." Javier examined the documents. Detailed manifests of military hardware, troop movements, tactical plans. "This is good intel. Why share it?" "The enemy of my enemy," Carlos shrugged. "El Lobo's power needs to be checked. You're doing our work for us. We're simply facilitating." "And after El Lobo?" Diego asked. "Your cartel just moves in to fill the vacuum?" "That's business. But I give you my word. This farm, this family, will be left alone. Some things are respected, even in our world." After Carlos left, the brothers debated their options. The intel was valuable, but trusting another cartel was dangerous. "We don't have much choice," Javier argued. "Rivera's equipment could overwhelm our defenses. We need this information." "Agreed," Diego nodded. "But we stay careful. This is still our fight." Mateo worked on adapting their defenses based on the new intelligence, while Javier scouted potential counterpositions to Rivera's likely strategies. Diego coordinated their preparations, knowing they faced their most dangerous challenge yet. A small figure darted through the evening shadows. Rosa, carrying a backpack that seemed too heavy for her small frame. "My father," she said when Diego found her, tears in her eyes. "He wanted me to give you this. He says he's sorry." The backpack contained detailed notes on El Lobo's operation. Guard schedules, radio frequencies, access codes. Marcus was trying to make amends for his betrayal. "Is he okay?" Diego asked gently. "They're watching us all the time now. But he said some things are worth dying for." Rosa's voice trembled. "Like you taught him." That night, as they fortified their positions, multiple surveillance drones flew over the farm. Rivera was mapping their defenses, preparing for a massive assault. "They've got thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar, electronic warfare suites," Javier reported. "Military-grade, top-of-the-line stuff." "Then we change the game," Diego decided. "Mateo, how's that surprise coming?" The youngest brother grinned despite his injured leg. "Almost ready? They want to play with electronics? Let's show them some real electronic warfare." Dawn brought the sound of heavy vehicles approaching, armored personnel carriers, support, trucks, mobile command units. Rivera wasn't just bringing weapons, he was bringing an army. Multiple strike teams, Javier called from his position. Regular cartel soldiers mixed with military units. Rivera's men are coordinating. Through their surveillance systems, they watched Rivera deploy his forces. The general was methodical, professional, setting up electronic warfare units to neutralize their communications and sensors. "He knows what he's doing," Diego admitted. "This isn't cartel brutality, it's military precision." But they had prepared for this. Mateo's new devices, built with components supplied by their unlikely cartel allies, waited for Rivera's electronic attack. The first strike came at noon, a massive electronic pulse meant to disable their defenses. But Mateo had anticipated this, his countermeasures redirecting the pulse back at Rivera's own equipment. "Their primary communications are scrambled," Mateo reported with satisfaction. "Backup systems failing. They're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way." Rivera adapted quickly, ordering his men to advance under cover of smoke and suppressing fire. But the brothers had prepared for this too. Javier's rifles spoke from unexpected angles, taking out command and control targets that Rivera thought were safely behind his lines. "They're pushing hard on the north side," Diego observed, "but their south flank is lighter than expected." "Trap," Emilio said from his chair. "Rivera wants us to think the south is weak, draw us out." He was right. When Mateo's sensors detected movement on the south perimeter, it revealed a heavy strike team waiting in ambush. The battle developed into a complex tactical game. Rivera's forces had superior numbers and equipment, but the brothers had preparation, skill, and intimate knowledge of their ground. "Multiple breaches attempted on the east wall," Javier reported. "They're using shaped charges, trying to create attack corridors." "Let them breach," Diego ordered. "Mateo?" The youngest brother triggered his latest surprises. The breach points became kill zones, trapping Rivera's assault teams in carefully prepared fields of fire. But Rivera was far from finished. His electronic warfare units had adapted to Mateo's countermeasures, and his troops showed the discipline of professional soldiers. "They're coordinating better now," Javier warned, "adapting to our patterns." A new sound joined the battle, the thump of heavy mortars. Rivera had brought serious artillery, and he was using it to systematically destroy their defensive positions. "Fall back to secondary positions," Diego commanded. "Let them think they're pushing us." The brothers executed a fighting retreat, drawing Rivera's forces deeper into their prepared grounds. Each step of their withdrawal was marked by deadly surprises, hidden charges, pre-sighted killing zones, interlocking fields of fire. "Their casualties are mounting," Javier reported. But Rivera's not stopping. He's willing to spend lives to gain ground. Through their surveillance, they watched El Lobo arrive at the command post, eager to witness their destruction. But something was wrong. Movement on their flanks didn't match Rivera's tactical patterns. "New players on the field," Diego called out. "Multiple teams approaching from the west." Carlos's voice crackled over their emergency frequency. "Consider This a gift from Sinaloa. Rivera's forces are about to have company. The rival cartel's strike teams hit Rivera's flanks hard, throwing his careful tactical advance into chaos. Professional soldiers found themselves caught between the brothers. Deadly defense and a savage cartel attack. Rivera's pulling back, Javier reported, trying to regroup his forces. But retreat was harder than advance. Every withdrawal route had been prepared, every escape path covered. Rivera's men found themselves trapped between carefully planned killing zones and the rival cartel's aggressive assault. The general himself remained calm, coordinating a fighting withdrawal. But his electronic warfare advantage was gone, his careful tactical approach disrupted, his forces taking heavy casualties. Through it all, Emilio sat in his chair, listening to the battle with practiced ears. His unseeing eyes seemed to track the flow of combat as he provided insights and warnings to his sons. Rivera's good, he observed, but he fights like a general, moving pieces on a board. You boys fight like family, protecting your home. The battle reached its climax as Rivera's forces, caught between multiple threats, began to break. Professional discipline gave way to survival instinct as soldiers and cartel gunmen alike sought escape. Rivera's falling back to his command post, Javier reported. El Lobo's already gone, slipped away when the attack failed. Let them go, Diego ordered. They've learned what they needed to learn. As sunset approached, the sounds of battle faded. Rivera's forces withdrew in professional order, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The rival cartel's teams melted, away as quickly as they had appeared. Carlos's voice came over their radio one final time. Consider the debt paid. Sinaloa remembers its friends. The brothers regrouped in the kitchen, treating wounds and assessing damage. The farm had taken a beating, but their core defenses held. Rivera will be back, Diego predicted. Men like him don't accept defeat easily. Let him come, Emilio said calmly. We are Alvarez. We've faced worse. As night fell over the battle-scarred farm, the brothers prepared for whatever would come next. Rivera had shown them the cartel's new capabilities, but they had shown him something more important, that no amount of military hardware could overcome the will of a family defending its home. The war wasn't over. El Lobo would find new weapons, new allies, new strategies. But on their farm, the Alvarez family remained unbroken, ready to face whatever came next, because that's what family did. They stood together, fought together, and if necessary, died together. Thunder rolled across the darkened sky as El Lobo surveyed his assembled forces from the hood of his armored SUV. Every cartel soldier, every mercenary, every corrupt police officer he could buy, all gathered for one final assault on the Alvarez farm. General Rivera stood beside him, his face hard as he coordinated with his remaining military units. No more games, El Lobo declared. No more tactical approaches. We hit them with everything, from all sides, until nothing remained standing. At the farm, Javier tracked the gathering storm through his scope, both natural and human. Multiple vehicles approaching from all access points. Heavy weapons, armored transports. They're not trying to be subtle anymore. Good, Diego replied, checking his weapons one final time. Subtlety is overrated. Mateo worked through his final calculations, despite his injured leg, ensuring every remaining charge was perfectly placed. They had spent days preparing for this moment, knowing El Lobo would eventually commit everything to one massive attack. Inside the house, Emilio sat in his familiar chair, his modified cane across his lap. How many? He asked quietly. At least 50 vehicles, Javier reported. Could be 200 men or more. El Lobo's emptied his accounts buying soldiers for this. Lightning split the sky as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Through their surveillance systems, they watched El Lobo's army advance. Corrupt police units took forward positions, using their lights and sirens to create chaos. Behind them, cartel gunmen in armored vehicles prepared their heavy weapons. Rivera's units are coordinating from the rear, Diego observed. He's learned from last time, keeping his professional soldiers as tactical support rather than frontline troops. Smart, Mateo agreed, but it won't save them. The first attack came as a wall of sound and fury. police sirens, vehicle engines, and heavy weapons fire all combining into a thunderous assault. The farm's outer defenses disappeared under a hail of bullets and explosions. "They're not trying to breach," Diego analyzed. "They're trying to erase us completely." But the brothers had prepared for this. Mateo's charges detonated in careful sequence, creating killing zones that caught the first wave of attackers by surprise. Javier's rifle spoke with deadly precision, targeting vehicle drivers and heavy weapons operators. "Multiple teams pushing through the cornfields," Javier reported, "using the crops as cover." Mateo, already on it. The cornfields erupted in controlled flames, driving the attackers into prepared fire lanes. Diego engaged them with clinical efficiency, his suppressed rifle adding to the growing count of El Lobo's losses. But the cartel leader had learned from his previous defeats. As the brothers focused on the ground attacks, Rivera's units began an electronic warfare assault that threatened to blind their defenses. "Losing camera feeds," Mateo warned. "They're using military-grade jammers." "Switch to backups," Diego ordered. "Fall back to secondary positions." The battle intensified as El Lobo committed more forces. Armored vehicles breached the outer perimeter, their heavy weapons chewing through the farm's defenses. Cartel soldiers advanced behind makeshift shields, while Rivera's men provided precise supporting fire. "They're actually coordinating this time," Javier observed, shifting positions to avoid counter-sniper fire, learning from their mistakes. Inside the house, Emilio listened to the battle with practiced ears. His enhanced hearing picked up details his sons might miss: the subtle shift in engine sounds as vehicles maneuvered, the different dialects among the attackers shouting orders. "Rivera's men are moving to your east flank," he warned. "They're trying to set up crossfire positions." Diego adjusted their defense accordingly, but the pressure was mounting. El Lobo had brought overwhelming force, and he was willing to spend lives to achieve his goal. "Running low on options here," Mateo reported, triggering his remaining charges to break up another assault. "Down to emergency reserves." "Make them count," Diego replied. "We only need to hold until—" His words were cut off by a massive explosion that illuminated the rain-soaked night. One of Rivera's units had breached their inner perimeter, threatening to split their defense. "Fall back to the house," Diego ordered. "Concentrate our defense. Make them come to us." The brothers executed a fighting retreat, making the attackers pay for every foot of ground they gained. Javier's rifle created chaos among El Lobo's officers, while Mateo's final charges turned apparent victories into costly traps. But the weight of numbers was beginning to tell. The farm's defenders found themselves pushed back to their final positions, surrounded by an army determined to destroy them. El Lobo watched from his command position, satisfaction growing as his forces tightened the noose. "Burn it all," he ordered. "Every building, every field. I want nothing left." The attack reached new levels of intensity. Incendiary rounds set buildings ablaze despite the rain, while heavy weapons pounded their remaining cover. The brothers fought with desperate skill, but they were running out of room to maneuver. Then Emilio's voice cut through their tactical channel. "They're getting sloppy. El Lobo's watching from the North Ridge. He thinks it's over." Diego's voice hardened. "Javier? I see him. But Rivera's got him well protected. It would take something big to—" A new sound joined the battle. Helicopter rotors approaching fast and low. El Lobo smiled, expecting Rivera's air support to finish the job. But these weren't Rivera's helicopters. "Multiple bogies incoming," Javier reported. "Not military, cartel markings." Carlos's voice crackled over their emergency frequency. "Sorry we're late to the party. Sinaloa sends its regards." The rival cartel's helicopters swept in from multiple directions, their door gunners opening up on El Lobo's forces. The carefully coordinated assault dissolved into chaos as soldiers and gunmen scattered for cover. "Now!" Diego ordered. The brothers launched their counterattack with devastating precision. Javier's rifle found priority targets among the confused officers. Mateo triggered his hidden reserves, specialized charges that had been waiting for this exact moment. Diego led the ground assault, years of special forces training combining with intimate knowledge of the terrain. El Lobo's army began to fragment. Rivera's professional soldiers tried to maintain order, but they were caught between the brothers' deadly expertise and the rival cartel's aggressive assault. Police units broke first, abandoning their positions and fleeing into the night. Cartel soldiers followed, their confidence shattered by the sudden reversal. But El Lobo himself remained, rage replacing his earlier satisfaction. "Stand and fight," he screamed at his retreating men. "I'll kill anyone who runs." "Sir," Rivera warned, "we need to withdraw. This position is—" A shot rang out, and the corrupt general fell, Javier's rifle having finally found its mark. El Lobo stared at his fallen commander for a moment, then turned to find Diego emerging from the rain and darkness. "Just you and me now," Diego said quietly. El Lobo drew his gold-plated pistol with snake-quick speed, but Diego was faster. The cartel leader's shot went wide as Diego closed the distance, turning the fight into a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Through their radios, Javier and Mateo listened to the fight while maintaining cover against the remaining attackers. Their brother was facing a man known for his brutality, who had clawed his way to power through violence and fear. But El Lobo had never faced someone like Diego Alvarez, a man fighting not for money or power, but for family. The cartel leader's expensive martial arts training met Diego's battle-hardened experience and found itself wanting. "You're pathetic," El Lobo spat through bloody teeth as they grappled in the mud. "All this over a worthless piece of land? You still don't understand," Diego replied, delivering another precise strike. "It was never about the land." The fight was short but vicious. El Lobo fought with desperate fury, but Diego's training and purpose proved superior. The cartel leader finally fell, broken and defeated, as his remaining forces fled into the night. "It's over," Diego said quietly, standing over his fallen enemy. "Kill me then," El Lobo wheezed. "Complete your victory." "No." The voice came from behind them. Emilio stood in the rain, his cane tapping steadily as he approached. "You don't deserve a warrior's death." Before El Lobo could respond, Emilio's cane flashed in the darkness. The hidden blade found its mark with blind precision, ending the cartel leader's reign with quiet efficiency. "You taught us that justice matters more than vengeance," Diego said softly. "I taught you many things," Emilio replied. "You and your brothers learned them well." Dawn broke over the Alvarez farm, revealing the cost of the night's battle. Buildings smoldered in the rain, fields were torn up by explosions and vehicle tracks, and the ground was littered with abandoned weapons and equipment. But the house still stood, and more importantly, the family remained unbroken. The brothers gathered in their kitchen, tending wounds and beginning plans for rebuilding. El Lobo's empire will collapse now, Mateo predicted. Too many enemies waiting to move. "And I'll let them," Diego replied, "as long as they remember what happened here." Emilio sat in his chair, listening to his sons discuss the future. His unseeing eyes held pride and peace. Pride in the men they had become. Peace in knowing their legacy was secure. "Your mother would be proud," he said simply. Outside, the sun rose on a new day. The war was over, but its lessons would remain. The Alvarez family had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, not through superior numbers or weapons, but through something more powerful, the unbreakable bonds of family. The farm would be rebuilt, the fields would grow again, and any who thought to threaten them in the future would remember the fate of those who dared to challenge the Alvarez family's quiet strength. The morning after El Lobo's fall brought more than just sunlight to the Alvarez farm. Black SUVs rolled up the damaged driveway, but these carried different insignias. Federal agents, both American and Mexican, coordinating in a joint task force that had been watching the cartel war unfold. Agent Sarah Walker, DEA, a tall woman in a tactical vest, introduced herself. "That was quite a show you put on last night." Diego stood on the bullet-riddled porch, his brothers flanking him protectively. "We were just defending our home." "By taking down one of the most notorious cartel leaders in the region?" Sarah's smile was knowing. along with a corrupt Mexican general and about 50 cartel soldiers. Inside the kitchen, federal agents carefully documented evidence while Emilio sat calmly in his chair, answering questions with measured precision. His acute hearing picked up multiple conversations, agents coordinating raids across the region, seizing El Lobo's assets, arresting corrupt officials. "We've been building a case against Rivera for months," Sarah explained. "Your little war gave us the perfect opportunity to move. El Lobo's death created a power vacuum we could exploit." Javier watched from his elevated position as more vehicles arrived. Forensics teams, intelligence officers, military liaisons. The farm had become the centerpiece of a massive federal operation. "Town's in chaos," Mateo reported through their radio. "Cartel lieutenants fighting for control, corrupt cops trying to cover their tracks. Feds are swarming everything." News. Helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of the battlefield the farm had become. The story was spreading rapidly. How a blind farmer and his sons had stood against cartel corruption and won. "You understand we'll need official statements," Sarah continued. "The paperwork alone on this will take months." "We'll cooperate," Diego assured her. "As long as our father's farm remains untouched." Sarah studied him carefully. "Your military records are impressive, all three of you. Special forces, combat decorations, classified operations. Makes me wonder if this was really just about defending a farm. Family is worth fighting for," Diego replied simply. The day brought more revelations as federal agents uncovered the full scope of El Lobo's operation. Marcus, Rosa's father, turned himself in, providing crucial evidence about the cartel's financial networks and corrupt officials. El Lobo kept detailed records, Sarah briefed them. Names, dates, payoff amounts. Half the local government was on his payroll. This is going to shake things up all the way to Mexico City. In town, longtime residents watched in amazement as federal agents arrested police officers, government officials, and business leaders. The cartel's grip on the region was crumbling, exposing years of corruption and violence. Rosa appeared at the farm, running to hug Emilio despite the federal agents' attempts to maintain their crime scene. "They arrested the bad men," she said through tears. "Dad says we're safe now." "Your father is a brave man," Emilio told her gently. "He made the right choice in the end." The Sinaloa cartel's involvement complicated matters, but Sarah seemed unsurprised. Rival cartels often help take down their competition. "We'll deal with them another day. For now, their assistance actually makes our job easier." Throughout the day, more pieces of El Lobo's empire fell. His bank accounts were frozen, his properties seized, his network of corruption exposed to federal scrutiny. The power he had built through violence and fear dissolved in the face of justice and law. General Rivera's death opens up another investigation, Sarah explained. Military corruption, weapons trafficking, international conspiracies. This could lead to major reforms in both countries. Local citizens, emboldened by the cartel's fall, began coming forward with their own stories. Years of abuse, extortion, and violence poured out as people finally felt safe enough to speak. "You started something here," Sarah told the brothers. "Something bigger than just defending your farm. You gave people hope that they could stand up to corruption and win." Diego supervised repairs to the farm's defenses, while Javier maintained watch and Mateo cataloged their remaining equipment. Federal agents worked around them, documenting evidence but careful not to interfere with the family's routine. "The media's going to want interviews," Sarah warned. "This story's too big to ignore. Local farmers standing up to cartel violence, corrupt officials exposed, international task force operations. It's got everything." "We're not interested in publicity," Diego replied. "Might not have a choice. People need heroes right now. They need to see that standing up to corruption is possible." In the following days, more federal resources poured into the region. Task forces coordinated across borders, sharing intelligence and conducting synchronized raids. El Lobo's death had created an opportunity that law enforcement had been waiting for. "Your military contacts helped," Sarah admitted. "When we heard special forces operators were involved, it gave us the confidence to move. We knew you could handle yourselves until we got here." The farm slowly began to recover. Local farmers helped repair damaged buildings, clear debris, and replant destroyed crops. The community that had lived in fear for so long found strength in working together. "This land represents something now," Emilio observed as he listened to the sounds of reconstruction. "More than just our family's heritage, it's become a symbol of resistance." Marcus was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, his intimate knowledge of El Lobo's operation proving invaluable to federal prosecutors. Rosa visited the farm daily, helping with repairs and bringing news from town. "The corrupt police chief tried to run," she reported excitedly. "But the federales caught him at the border, and they found all his secret money." The brothers maintained their vigilance despite the federal presence. Years of combat experience had taught them that transition periods were dangerous. Rival cartels might see opportunity in the chaos. "Sinaloa's staying clear for now," Sarah assured them. "Your alliance with them actually helps maintain stability while we dismantle El Lobo's network. Sometimes the enemy of my enemy really is my friend." Evidence from El Lobo's compound revealed the full scope of his ambitions. He had been planning to expand his territory, using the Alvarez farm as a test of his power. His defeat had not only stopped his expansion, but had exposed vulnerabilities in the entire cartel system. "Other cartels are watching," Sarah explained. "They're seeing what happens when local resistance meets federal support. It changes the game." The media descended on the region, turning the Alvarez family into reluctant symbols of the fight against corruption. Their story spread across both countries: the blind farmer who stood his ground, the special forces' sons who came home to protect their legacy, the local community that found its courage. "People need this," Sarah insisted when Diego protested the attention. "They need to see that sometimes the good guys win." Emilio handled the publicity with quiet dignity, his calm strength providing an anchor for the growing movement against youth cartel influence. His unseeing eyes seemed to see straight through reporters' attempts at sensationalism, keeping the focus on community and justice. "We did what any family would do," he told them simply. "We protected our own." Federal agents uncovered more of Rivera's operation, leading to arrests within the Mexican military hierarchy. The general's corruption had run deep, but his death had opened the door to reform and accountability. "Change is coming," Sarah predicted. "Slow and difficult, but real. What happened here, what your family did, it's going to have lasting effects." The brothers slowly relaxed their defensive posture as federal presence in the region stabilized. Javier's sniper nest became an observation post for task force operations. Mateo's expertise helped EOD teams clear unexploded ordnance from the battlefields. "You could have futures in law enforcement," Sarah suggested. "Your skills, your experience. We could use men like you." "Our place is here," Diego replied, watching local farmers help rebuild their barn. "This is what we fought for." As weeks passed, the region began to transform. New police officers were appointed, their backgrounds thoroughly vetted. Government officials were replaced with reformers committed to transparency. The community began to heal. "It won't be perfect," Sarah admitted during her final briefing. "There will always be those who seek power through violence. But now people know they can resist. They've seen it work." The Alvarez farm remained a symbol, but it was also returning to its true purpose: feeding people, providing honest work, carrying on a family legacy. The bullet holes would be patched, the fields would be replanted, life would go on. "Your mother would be proud," Emilio told his sons as they sat on their rebuilt porch. "Not just of the fighting, but of what came after. Sometimes the hardest battle is building something worth protecting." The sun set on a changed landscape. Federal agents continued their work, local citizens held their heads higher, and a family that had risked everything for their principles found themselves at the heart of something larger than they had imagined. The war was over, but its impact would ripple out for years to come. The Alvarez family had fought for their home and won more than just their own freedom. They had shown that courage, when backed by justice, could overcome even the most entrenched corruption, and in the end, that was a legacy worth any price. 1. Year after El Lobo's fall, the Alvarez farm stood renewed under the warm spring sun. Fresh paint covered the repaired buildings, young corn stalks reached toward the sky, and the scars of battle had largely faded from the land. But subtle changes remained. Reinforced walls beneath the fresh paint, security systems hidden in the rebuilt structures, and 3 brothers who had chosen to make their father's farm their permanent home. Diego walked the perimeter out of habit, though his tactical vest had been replaced by working clothes stained with honest dirt. The weapons were stored away, but never too far, a reminder that peace must sometimes be guarded. Thinking deep thoughts, Javier called from the new water tower, where his sniper's nest had been converted into an observation platform for monitoring the crops. "Just remembering," Diego replied. "Hard to believe it's been a year." The sound of children's laughter drew their attention. Rosa's family had moved into the old Thompson place, her father Marcus having earned not just immunity, but respect for his role in dismantling the cartel's network. Now she led a group of local kids on farm tours, teaching them about agriculture and honest work. "Mr. Alvarez," she called out, leading her group toward the house. "We brought the harvest reports." Emilio sat on his rebuilt porch, his cane resting beside him as he listened to the children's excited voices. His unseeing eyes crinkled with pleasure as they shared news of their community garden project, an initiative that had spread across the region, turning abandoned cartel properties into productive farmland. "The tomatoes are coming in strong," Rosa reported proudly, "and the new irrigation system works just like Mateo designed it." The youngest Alvarez brother had found a new calling, using his technical skills to help modernize local farms. His explosive expertise had been replaced by irrigation innovations and sustainable farming techniques, though a few of his security systems remained discreetly in place. Inside the house, Sarah Walker sat at the kitchen table, her DEA badge set aside. As she shared coffee with the family, her task force had become a permanent presence in the region, working with local communities to prevent cartel influence from returning. "The reforms are holding," she reported. "New police chiefs doing well, local governments staying clean. Your story helped change things beyond just this area. Other communities are standing up, refusing to be intimidated." "Good," Diego nodded. "That's worth more than taking down one cartel leader." The media attention had eventually faded, but the Alvarez family's example remained. Their story was taught in local schools, not as a celebration of violence, but as a lesson in standing up for principles. "The Sinaloa cartels kept their word," Sarah added. "They're maintaining distance from this region. Your reputation probably helps. Nobody wants to risk becoming another El Lobo." Mateo joined them, his limp barely noticeable now. "Got the new well system working at the Martinez place. Their yield should double this year." The brothers had found different ways to protect their community. Diego worked with local law enforcement, training them in professional tactics and ethical policing. Javier taught marksmanship and discipline to neighboring farmers, ensuring they could defend their lands if needed. Mateo's technical skills helped modernize the region's agriculture. "Your father must be proud," Sarah observed, seeing his sons build something instead of just fighting. "The fighting was never the point," Diego replied. "It was always about protecting what matters." Outside, more vehicles approached, local farmers arriving for the weekly community meeting. What had started as informal gatherings to coordinate defense against the cartels had evolved into an agricultural cooperative, helping small farmers compete with larger operations. Marcus arrived with the others, his face weathered but peaceful. The guilt of his brief betrayal had been washed away by a year of honest work and community service. He carried himself differently now, with the quiet pride of a man who had found his true path. "The northern irrigation project is ahead of schedule," he reported. "Should have water flowing to the outlying farms by next month." The meeting moved to the barn, converted now into a community center. Farmers discussed crop rotations, shared equipment needs, and coordinated market strategies. Armed guards had been replaced by agricultural experts, though a certain watchfulness remained in everyone's eyes. "Remember when this barn was a defensive position?" Mateo whispered to Javier. "Now it's hosting farming seminars and community dances." "Still defending something," Javier replied, "just in a different way." As the sun began to set, the farmers departed, leaving the family to their evening routine. Rosa helped Emilio with dinner preparations, her small hands confident as she described the colors of vegetables she helped him select. "The green peppers are really bright today," she explained, "and the tomatoes are that deep red you like." Emilio smiled, his fingers testing the produce with practiced skill. "You have a good eye, Pequeña. You'll be a fine farmer someday." The brothers settled into their evening positions more from habit than necessity now. Javier still liked the high ground, watching the sunset from his observation post. Mateo checked his monitoring systems, more focused on weather patterns than security threats. Diego walked the perimeter, remembering other nights when such walks meant survival. Sarah joined them for dinner, having become something of an honorary family member over the past year. The conversation moved easily between English and Spanish, discussing everything from crop prices to regional politics. "Washington's interested in your agricultural cooperative model," she mentioned. "They think it could work in other regions dealing with cartel influence. Give people a legitimate alternative, something worth protecting." "It only works if the people are committed," Diego cautioned. "You can't force community spirit." After dinner, as the night settled in, Emilio sat on his porch with his sons. The evening air carried the scent of growing things, of fertile earth and honest work. His cane rested beside him, its hidden blade long unused but maintained out of respect, for harder times. "Your mother always said there were two ways to fight darkness," he spoke softly. "One was with force, the other with growth. We did both." The brothers listened, understanding the wisdom in their father's words. They had fought when necessary, with all the skill and fury their training provided. But the real victory had come, after in the patient work of building something better. "The land remembers," Emilio continued. "It remembers the blood and the battles, yes. But it also remembers the healing, the coming together, the new life that grows from old wounds." In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the fields. Time was when such sounds might have masked approaching enemies. Now they were just part of the night music of their home. "We are Alvarez," Emilio said, his unseeing eyes turned toward the stars. "We stand." The words carried weight, not as a battle cry now, but as a quiet affirmation. They had stood against violence and corruption, yes, but more importantly, they had stood for something. Family, community, the right of people to live in peace and dignity. Sarah left late, driving back to her office in town. The brothers secured the farm for the night, more from ingrained habit than real concern. Javier's final perimeter check found only peaceful darkness. Mateo's systems monitored weather and irrigation levels rather than threat movements. In his room, Diego looked at the medals and combat decorations stored away in their box. They seemed distant now, belonging to another life. His hands were stained with dirt instead of gunpowder, and he preferred it that way. The night settled over the Alvarez farm like a gentle blanket. In town, new streetlights illuminated clean, streets where children could play without fear. Local police patrolled with professional pride, earning community respect through service rather than intimidation. Emilio sat in his chair, listening to his home's night sounds. His acute hearing picked up his son's movements. Javier on his evening walk, Mateo tinkering with some new irrigation design, Diego checking the locks one last time. They were good men, his boys. They had fought like warriors when needed, but had found the harder strength required to build peace. They had turned their military skills to community service, their tactical knowledge to agricultural innovation, their protective instincts to nurturing growth. The war was long over, but its lessons remained. The Alvarez family had shown that courage took many forms. The fierce courage of combat, yes, but also the quiet courage of standing firm, of rebuilding, of choosing to grow good things in soil that had tasted violence. Their story would be told, in different ways. Some would remember the battles, the tactical brilliance, the defeat of a powerful cartel, but others, perhaps wiser, would remember what came after, how a community found its strength, how farmers stood together, how peace could be built with calloused hands and determined hearts. Morning would bring another day of honest work. The corn would grow taller, the community would grow stronger, and the Alvarez legacy would continue, not as warriors, though they could be that if needed, but as builders, growers, protectors of something precious. They were Alvarez. They stood, and in their standing, they had helped others find the courage to stand as well. That was a victory worth more than any battle.